Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about What If Naruto X Asia part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Exorcists. Those who fight for the church, the biblical God, and angels. Exorcists are noble, caring, and kind to their allies, children, and fellow brothers and sisters. They carry the will of God and purify devils, fallen angels, and monsters. Creatures of the dark that lurk at night, feasting upon the innocent. Though, there are some exorcists who stray from the Lord, from their teachings, and ally with church's enemies. Some stray because of having innocent blood on their hands, some because of having a forbidden relationship with devils themselves. The very creatures they sworn to slay. And some stray because they kill without remorse. Standing in an altar was a man dressed in the robes of a priest. He was old, in his 50s or 60s. He had a balding head with gray hair on the sides. His smile looked slightly on the insane side, gripping the dagger in his hand tightly as he looked at his fellow brothers and sisters who had strayed from their heavenly Father. He cleared his throat and straightened his posture. My brothers and sisters. He started, we gather here tonight to carry out the will of our Lord and Savior and our Father. As he talked, the man looked amongst the crowd of men and women dressed similarly to him as the moonlight shined down the broken window of the abandoned church they currently resided in, illuminating the interior while the candles lighted the sides. Though the church believes that we have strayed due to our methods to deal with our enemies, to simply kill those we have waged war on for centuries, his eyes glinted with malice and insanity. I am here to tell you that they are wrong. The man's words earned shout of approval and applause from the gathered men and women, cheering the man on. In this day and age, the church is overrun by fools who forbid us from killing humans. He sneered hideously, nay. Humans have dealt with the devils over and over again. They never learn from their mistakes and continue to do so to stratify their greed and lust. The crowd was silent, listening intently to the priest. Every era, it is the same. He snapped his fingers. The door behind him opened and two stray exorcists came out, dragging a bound and gagged man, along with two women in the same state. Metallic shackles on their feet and hands, refusing them to escape. The two exorcists dragged the three onto the altar. On your knees, heathens. One of the guards ordered coldly, forcing the three down, showing the man and women in full display in front of the crowd. The priest looked at them with disgust and anger. The bounded man managed to spit out his gag and looked at the priest with pleading eyes. Please. I need to do it. My wife and child. The priest kicked him in anger, successfully silencing the sobbing man. Quiet, worm. The priest hissed. The old man gestured towards the three. My brothers and sisters, these vile heathens. Dare make deals with the devils. To sell their souls and became their servants. He grabbed one of women, the brunette, by the hair and dragged her in the middle of the altar, displaying her in front of the exorcists. Let us purge them from their darkness. The crowd roared in agreement. O Lord above. We ask of thee to guide this poor lost lamb back to the path of the light and into your loving embrace once again as we purge her and her companions from their sins. The woman screamed and frayed about, but it was futile as she watched helplessly as the priest brought the dagger over his head. He grinned viciously. Be joyous, my child, as I cleanse you and the others. Clapping was heard from the back of the church. The sound filled the halls of the building and echoed off the walls, temporarily stopping the priest. Who dares? I dare. The crowd started to separate, dividing as a figure walked towards the altar. He was young, judging by the boy's youthful face. Between 17 or 16. He had wild, untamed blonde hair, spiking in different directions around his head. A black leather motorcycle jacket covered his torso, zipped up and mainly revealed an orange shirt beneath, black gloves covering his hands. A silver cross on his neck. His jeans were slightly dirtied and his black boots were in the same state as his pants. The priest looked down at the boy's blue eyes before widening his eyes when he noticed the three scar-like lines on his cheeks. Oh you. The priest sneered. You dare disturb this sacred ritual, boy. The blonde snorted. Sacred ritual. You're just lunatics killing innocents, under the Lord's name no less. The crowd murmured and whispered amongst themselves, looking at the intruder in shock and anger. The priest stayed silent before. Ha 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 ha. The man's laugh permeated and bounced and echoed as he held his gut with both arms. He sneered and stared at the insolent boy. You speak as if we are committing wrong, but tell me how can you say that when you sided with that whore of a nun? The blonde's eyes narrowed. The old man only grinned. Oh? Have I touched a nerve? Is the former holy priestess a touchy subject, Uzumaki Naruto? He scoffed. Bah. That whore never deserved that title after she healed a devil. He looked down on the boy in front of him, and yet when you, yourself, has committed treason by siding with her. You accuse us of treachery. The old man sniffed. Who are you, to judge and decides us guilty or not? The blonde gave the priest a look filled with sorrow mixed with pity. I'm not the one who decides. Suddenly, he flinched, as if he was hit physically, and collapsed to his knees. The blonde's retina started to turn a burn, turning into a flaming yellow color. The skin on his head started peeling and burning, his hair scorching. Naruto flinched in pain and turned his head to the side, breathing heavily. His skin burned and charred, turning into flaming wisps that scattered like ashes. He uttered a low growl and turned his head to glare at the priest. Half of his face torn apart, leaving his flaming skull for the stray exorcists to see. The crowd stared at the boy, aghast, horrified and shocked. The priest let go of the woman and stepped back in shock and fear, the crowd doing the same. What madness is this, one of the exorcists exclaimed. He's a monster. The church was right to excommunicate him. The priest stared at the young blonde fearfully, a sacred gear. No. By now, the blonde's skin and hair was completely burned, leaving behind his skull, now ablaze. He glared at the priest with hate, his burning orb staring back at the man's beady black. His entire figure was now a skeleton surrounded by hellish flames. Like curse. Furious chains erupted from the flaming skeleton's bony hands and pierced one of the incoming guards. The flaming chain burst from the man's chest and he soon fell forward after it was dislodged. The skeleton leaned his body to the side when the other guard attempted to charge at him. The stray exorcist died screaming as his body burned. At the heretic. Most of the exorcists were impaled by the barrage of flaming chains and fire that burned and charred their forms in an instant. The lone skeleton grabbed another by the neck and wrapped the burning chains around the exorcist's neck, and then promptly used him as a makeshift rag doll, swinging the screaming exorcist around, hitting and impacting other strays. All of you guilty. More and more started to join in the fight, generating their light weapons and helping their brethren. It was all for naught when the skeleton tore through the exorcists with ease, leaving behind scorched corpses in his wake. As the young man fought exorcist after exorcist, several began to panic, rushing for the large, peeling, and rotten door of the church in an attempt to escape their death. The skeleton saw this and brought its gloved hand to his mouth and whistled. The sound of a motorcycle filled the church, rolling in like thunder. Its engines purring with power and ferocity. The exorcists reaching for the doors stopped with gasps or cries of outrage as a burning streak that soon turned out to be a burning motorcycle blocked their exit. The chopper had a normal headlight, 2 pikes at its side as fire covered the front and back wheels. Its gas tank and back looked demonic. The front forks were styled like chain links that ended in pikes. The frame was a dark chromatic steel. Fire filled the wheels, covering and licking the tires, engulfing them in its flames. One foolish exorcist tried to move the chopper, to no avail, burning the man's hands and himself in the process. "You're not going anywhere." Immediately, the chopper roared to life and revved up. It soon took off, speeding across the church, breaking the pedestals, pews, and objects laying about, even running over other exorcists. The exorcists trying to escape backed up as the chopper raced around the now huddled group, effectively creating a ring of fire, surrounding the former priests and nuns, burning and choking them to death. The others that didn't follow their cowardly comrades trained their guns on the skeleton and fired. The light bullets passed the skeleton's clothing harmlessly, while some hit his shoulders and arms, causing the rider to take a step back. He chuckled mirthlessly, his voice, once smooth, now growly and demonic-like. "Your bullets may harm me but..." Within an instant, the hellish skeleton swiped his chains at the gun-wielding exorcists, making them drop their weapons, watching helplessly as the guns melted in the ground. The rider ran to the nearest exorcist within a second and grabbed the man's neck. "Your useless toys won't stop me." With that, he threw the man with force and strength, seeing him impacting and landing on another exorcist. One of the exorcists charged with their sword drawn, only for the rider to duck under the man's swing and delivered a flaming punch to the head. The exorcist was sent to the ground, breaking the church's tiles, and remained there as his body fell limp. "Take this." The lucky exorcist managed to send a right hook to the skeleton's jaw, breaking the lower half as it hung loosely. The exorcist stepped back in shock as the skeleton placed a hand on the broken bone and snapped it back in place with a resounding crack. The skeleton wagged its finger, mocking the futile attempt to hurt him. He punched the exorcist in retaliation, feeling a sense of satisfaction when a crunch was heard as the exorcist was sent flying into a wall, taking down one unlucky comrade with him. The skeleton then tilted his head back when one more tried to stab him with a holy sword. The rider grabbed the offending appendage holding the weapon, pulling the exorcist close and struck the man's larynx, breaking his neck in the process. For the glory of God. The skeleton dodged another swing from one more exorcist and grabbed his face with his skeletal hand. He growled. "Glory, nothing." Soon, the exorcist started to scream as his skin started to melt and burn. Sadly, his cries of pain were unheard in the chaos, being muffled by the rider only served to silence him. He soon dropped the dead exorcist, not minding as the corpse fell down to the ground beneath him. For a brief moment, the rider looked back at the altar, watching as the 3 captured people left via backdoor, the man who was kicked by the priest, looking at the skeleton with a fearful but thankful look before slamming the door behind him. Now, only a handful of exorcists were left, the others, either burned, a corpse in the many, fortunate enough to escape, or were part of the handful that were left. All of you will burn. Flames erupted once more, furious flames started to surround and overwhelm the exorcists as they desperately tried to fight back the ongoing barrage of metal and fire, to no avail. When the deed was done, the skeleton cracked his neck before looking behind him in a menacing glare. You think you can escape me? He slowly approached the altar, where a quivering and shaking blob of black and white was found. With a growl, he grabbed said blob and pulled him up with one hand, the blob, revealing to be the priest. The skeleton glowered at the fearful priest before recoiling his flaming skull in abhorrence. The darkness in your soul disgusts me. Please. Spare me. I was only doing our Heavenly Father's work. The old man blabbered and begged. There is only but one fate for the guilty. Roughly forcing the old priest to stare at the skeleton's flaming orbs, the rider spoke, look into my eyes. Feel the pain you've caused upon many. The priest screamed. He screamed long and loud. His shrieks were music to the young man's ears. It was an incoherent sound. The sound of true pain and suffering. The demon. The old man dropped like a sack of potatoes and slumped to his side. His once beady black eyes, now like crisp and burned, much like charcoal. The skeleton looked at the dead priest before turning around and leaving the now silent church. As he stepped into the cool and crisp air of the night, the rider looked to the side and, soon, his flaming chopper appeared like a streak of light. He gingerly straddled the bike and gripped its handlebars tightly, revving it and enjoying its thunderous purrs. As the skeleton rode off into the night he muttered one last thing. I'm coming for you, Selson. Your retribution is near. My, aren't you in a fickle? Naruto gasped and grunted in pain, holding his bleeding chest as he stared at the man in front of him. This was bad, really bad. Just a week after he defected from the church. Exorcist after exorcist ruthlessly hunted him down. He had to move from town to town to avoid his former comrades in an attempt to hide. Though, after just 3 weeks of hiding, one lucky group managed to find him in a small town in America, where he currently hid. They were relentless and fought him the first second he saw them from a bar. At least, he fended them off for a short time, but one lucky exorcist managed to stab him, leading to his situation now, in the abandoned part of an industrial area, bleeding to death. His weapons and holy sword, long broken and forgotten. And suddenly, this man appeared, with the scent of a devil. Just great. The man himself was middle-aged. He had gelled hair that was a mix of blue and red, slicked back. He wore a black, buttoned-up duster, matching black slacks and shoes. His blue-red eyes stared at him with a hint of amusement as he approached him. The man had a mysterious yet ominous vibe surrounding him, making Naruto all the more weary. The cane he held tapped against the concrete, being the only noise that filled the night air. Naruto glared at him. The man seemed to regard the blonde's hostility. Why the face? Have I done something already? You have a scent of a devil. He rose an eyebrow at the claim. Oh? Are you an exorcist? He asked and looked at the blonde once more. By how torn your clothes are, I barely recognize your uniform. He laughed. Naruto gritted his teeth and looked down. The man kneeled in front of the bleeding teen and grasped the holy dagger stabbed in his shoulder. Doesn't that hurt you? Oh, it does. But I've felt worse. He said casually. Now, hold still. This might hurt. Naruto gasped and held a torn cloth tightly as the dagger was dislodged from his shoulder. He gently put a hand on his bleeding shoulder and looked at the man. Why are you helping me? The teen asked carefully, eyeing the devil with alarm. Can't devils also be good Samaritans once in a while? He said, tossing the holy dagger away. Devils usually attack me when they see me. Oh, don't worry boy. I'm a different kind of devil. The man smirked slyly. Though, it seems your quest to find that little nun has been tiring, I assume. Immediately, Naruto stiffened and looked at the man with revived hostility and alarm. How do you know that? The blonde demanded angrily. His stance, even if he was injured, changed ever so slightly. Let's just say, I have connections. Naruto didn't look convinced, to which the man sighed. Don't worry, boy. I won't hurt you, he assured, haven't I shown that? The former exorcist kept his glare. I don't even know your name. The devil smirked. You want to know who I am? Very well then. You may call me Mephistopheles. 3 months. 3 months, 19 days, 22 hours, 5 minutes and 2 seconds. He counted. He counted the days and nights he didn't transform into that thing. It had been a full month since he used his curse. His mind would go hazy, and his memories would usually be off and fuzzy whenever he used that hellish power. Naruto Uzumaki, aged 17. Sighed and put a hand on his face, slowly dragging the appendage down with noticeable tiredness in his form. He currently sat on a rotten wooden stool inside an abandoned concrete building. His chopper, now reverted back into its original state, was parked nearby, ready for him to hop on and ride off should any exorcist hunting him down would somehow find him in the middle of nowhere. Where was he? He didn't know anymore, somewhere in Japan most likely. He moved his hand away from his face and looked at it with intensity. The appendage's skin slowly started to burn and tear, opening up and revealing the bones within. Naruto cursed and quickly jerked his hand in a random direction, watching as a fiery bolt burned a nearby table, reducing it to ashes. He looked at his bony hand and gritted his teeth, forcing his curse back. It was stressful and tiring really, trying to control his power. The thing inside him, it would shriek and rage, begging him to be released whenever a malicious presence would appear, and would always leave a small headache every time he took back control. Stupid curse. Naruto sighed and gingerly held the silver cross dangling from his neck, gently rubbing it with his fingers in an attempt to calm himself. The cross was a gift from his precious person. The person he left the church for, to protect her with his life. Asia Argento. His precious person. His very first friend when he moved to the church. His sole reason he took the curse to begin with. The blonde didn't know where she was, where the church moved her. But he would find out. He'd be there for her, like she did for him. He'd go through hell and back for her. He made a promise to find her and protect her, no matter what. It was a promise of a lifetime. Naruto shook his head and sighed once more and stood up before straddling his chopper. The engines roared to life as his motorcycle's lights turned on. He revved the bike, listening to the wheels screeching, before riding off. 3 months, 19 days, 23 hours, 7 minutes, and 3 seconds. The moon shined ever so dimly as breeze blew by, rustling leaves responding to the wind and flying away. Naruto didn't know why the bike had led him to a graveyard, but it was clear, judging by the corpses that were laying about, stabbed, cut in half, beheaded and slashed, that there was a battle nearby. What happened here? He stopped his chopper at the entrance of the graveyard and approached one of the bodies and examined it. The body was cut up and was missing an arm and leg. He or she was stabbed in the chest several times. Naruto grunted and held his head before shaking it forcefully, ignoring the burning feeling he got. Die. Human. Reacting quickly, Naruto grabbed whoever tried to sneak up on him and held he or she by the neck. The vampire. He was injured and bleeding badly. Judging by the wound in his chest, he won't survive long. The vampire hissed and shrieked, clawing at Naruto's hand, but to no avail. The blonde narrowed his eyes at him. What happened here? Who were you fighting? He demanded. The vampire, with glaring eyes that could kill, opened his mouth to speak, only for a spear made of light to re-enter the wound on the monster's chest. Blood spurted out like a fountain as the vampire gave a silent scream before succumbing to his wounds and died. Naruto widened his eyes at the spear and dropped the body. Thank you for helping me take down this vile creature. A bubbly and familiar voice trailed off when the figure saw the blonde. Naruto cursed whatever deity had it out for him. I shall cleanse you in the name of God. Amen. Arena Shido, clad in her church battle suit, which consisted of a black, skin-tight, short-sleeve unitard with pauldrons, matching fingerless gloves that extend to her biceps, and thigh-high boots, all of which are adorned with straps, panted as she ducked under a swing from a vampire and stabbed its back. Zenobia wasn't here, unfortunately, she could use all the help she could get, but sadly, her partner was in Vatican, attending a request from the angels above. Oh, how she wished she was there with her partner. But unfortunately, she was here in Japan, dealing with vampires that currently resided in a graveyard, terrorizing the nearby town. It did not matter, if it meant helping people in the name of the Lord, then she would gladly do it. You dare enter our territory. Arena glared at the next vampire, he shrieked and flew at the girl, but Arena was ready and dodged quickly. Using Excalibur Mimic, she slashed at him. He screamed and drove forward, barreling towards her. Just as he was about to hit her, Irina leaped and used the vampire's head as a stepping stone. As she was in midair, the brunette formed a light bow and carefully aimed. Just need to get the angle right and she pulled the string back and watched as the arrow sailed towards its target. The vampire hissed and went down, the light arrow lodged in his shoulder. Irina scat as she landed before charging at the downed monster. Grabbing Excalibur Mimic, she slashed at the vampire, only for the creature to roll away in time, but not without a flesh wound on his chest. The girl glared and went into a stance, glaring at the creature of the night. The vampire hissed and flapped his wings before flying away from the exorcist to the entrance of the graveyard. Irina stood there, gaping, with wide eyes. Hey. Getting out of her stupor, Irina gave chase to the vampire. Get back here, you. The brunette ran after the injured creature, narrowly missing and sometimes stumbling upon the corpses that were strewn about. She stopped when the creature suddenly stood there. Irina blinked in confusion and saw a figure shrouded by the darkness holding up the injured monster. This was her chance. Carefully, she formed a light spear in her hands and aimed, then threw it with force. The spear successfully stabbed the vampire. Irina watched in satisfaction as the figure dropped the creature. The brunette approached the unknown and smiled at them. Thank you for helping me take down this vile creature. Her voice trailed off and she suddenly became quiet when Irina noticed who them he was. Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki regarded her with sad and familiar eyes. Irina. He had changed from when he last saw him. Gone was the clothes she always saw him garbed back when they worked together, now replaced by an attire that made him look like a biker, complete with a leather jacket. Irina was silent, looking at the blonde with familiarity, anger, and relief. She wasn't imagining, he was really here. The boy who helped her up in during their missions, who became her first friend when she moved to the Vatican for a short period of time. She could do it right now. Kill him, for treason. For betraying the church. But she couldn't. The howling shriek was heard, and the two looked up to see a silver-haired vampire looking at them with hate and rage. He looked to be more noble-looking than the others, a shen white hair flowing down his face which reached his neck, red eyes that seemed to glow in the night, wearing an attire fit for royalty, with a black cape to finish the look. A vampire from the Teeps faction, if Naruto were to assume. Irina was quick and fired a light arrow at the creature, who dodged. "You dare try to hit me," he said, and then scoffed. "Know your place, worm." With that, he flew off. Heading deeper towards the bloody graveyard. Most likely thinking that they weren't worth his time. Irina followed, chasing after the creature to kill him. "Irina-chan, wait. Don't call me that," the girl said coldly. She tried to move, but Naruto stopped her by holding her arm. "We share an enemy, I can help you," he offered, but Irina scoffed and walked away. "I don't need your help," she muttered, a bit of something in her tone Naruto couldn't recognize. "Please," he insisted. "Leave me alone." "Irina." The girl rounded on him and glared. "How can I trust you?" she asked. Irina looked down and bit her lip. "It hurt, you know. After you left the church," she said softly, her emotion slipping out. "You were my friend, Naruto." Despite how much Irina tried to hide it, a bit of hurt entered her tone. Naruto stepped closer to her. "I still am," Naruto said softly. Irina felt a pang in her chest after he said that, but nonetheless, she held her glare. "No. I can do this by myself." The flapping of wings was heard, and the two stopped momentarily, looking ahead of them. "More monsters. So, partners for now?" Naruto asked. Irina nodded, albeit hesitantly, and summoned Excalibur Mimic. Naruto held out his hands, and in a fiery show, summoned two daggers attached to chains that linked around his forearms. More and more vampires started to appear from their cover in the darkness of the graveyard. The creatures hissed and glared, slowly forming a circle around the two in an attempt to surround them. By now, Naruto and Irina were back to back, the two looked around them cautiously as the creatures advanced. Then, they attacked. Naruto quickly took down two creatures that flew towards him, stabbing one, removing his blade from the vampire's chest. He grabbed another vampire's arm that swiped at him and brought the creature closer. Bringing down his blade upon the monster's neck, he wrapped the chain around the dying creature and kicked the monster away from him. "You shall be purged from your sins," Irina declared before forming two light spears, throwing them at two unsuspecting vampires, killing one and injuring the other. She jumped when another charged at her. Irina placed a hand on the creature's back and flipped away from the monster. Summoning Excalibur Mimic, Irina gave the vampire a quick death via sword to the neck. "Die. Foul beasts." With a cry, Irina beheaded a vampire that tried to attack her from behind. Rolling away, she kicked another in the chest, giving space. Naruto saw this, and in another fiery show, a pistol was formed in his hand. Training the gun on the vampire, Naruto pulled the trigger, watching in satisfaction as the flaming bullet met its target's skull. The two fought, side by side, coordinating their attacks perfectly. If one was on the offensive, the other was defending them. They both looked synchronized with each other, slaying the creatures one by one. It looked beautiful. The dance of blades and chains. As the last vampire fell, Naruto and Irina relaxed, standing together in a group of bodies laid away. "This feels nostalgic, you know?" Irina nodded fondly. "Yes. It really does feel familiar," she said solemnly. It was too bad that this was temporary. After this they were back to being enemies. As much as she wanted to deny that, to refuse and never accept. It was inevitable. "We should go," Naruto suggested. Irina nodded, and the two walked through the dark graveyard. As they advanced, Naruto groaned and held his head. He gritted his teeth, his hand turning into a fist. Irina gave a look of concern when this happened and turned towards the blonde. "Are you okay?" Naruto didn't answer at first, far too preoccupied as his fist started to smoke slightly. "Damn it. Of all times." "I am fine," he lied through his teeth. Irina frowned, approaching the teen, she placed a hand on his shoulder and gave him a look. "You're not." "Irina, we still need to chase that vampire." The brunette huffed rather cutely. "Fine. Have it your way." With that, she walked ahead, grumbling all the way. Naruto sighed before cringing and held his head. His eyes flickering from their normal blues to burning yellow. "Justice is calling, boy. Unleash me." "No. Foolish." It roared. Naruto closed his eyes and breathed. In, out, a method to calm himself. The whiskered blonde forced the voice away, feeling the presence gone. Naruto stood up and caught up with Irina after a few minutes. Irina, however, fed when he walked by her side and turned her head childishly, crossing her arms under her bust as they walked through the silent graveyard. Naruto looked at her, seriously. He asked dryly. HMPH. Come on. I'm fine. Tobeo. The blonde blinked. Damn it. Thought I got rid of that. He muttered to himself. Unknown to Naruto, Irina had a small smile on her face when the blonde said that. He was still the same Naruto after all. They encountered some more low-class vampires on their way, but the two handled the monsters fine. Naruto still had the headache as they walked, though it was toned down to the point where it was just a minor annoyance. It still hurts though. The two soon neared the end of the graveyard, where the feeling of a cold presence, more powerful than the other vampires they fought had. He was here, the last and stronger vampire. Hog rolled in, blanketing the entirety of the graveyard in a dark mist. Show yourself, vile heathen. So you may feel the power of God. Irina called out, summoning Excalibur Mimic. Out of nowhere, a swarm of bats flew right in front of them, forcing them to shield their faces. The bats shrieked as they flew into the night sky. Naruto gripped his head with both of his hands as his headache increased tenfold. He gritted his teeth and cursed and shook his head wildly. Naruto. Irina said worriedly. Both of you will die. Suddenly, the shadows shifted and the Teep's vampire appeared, baring his fangs at them. The creature charged and tackled Naruto, who was still in pain. The vampire grinned menacingly and showed its fangs, glinting with desire. I will feast on your blood. Stay away from him. Irina immediately came to Naruto's side and attacked the vampire with her holy sword. The vampire hissed and dodged, using his wings and flew into the air. You and your boyfriend shouldn't have come here, girl. Irina sputtered incoherently with pink cheeks. He's not my boyfriend. The exorcist cried out. It matters not. You and he will die all the same. And charged at the exorcist. Irina dodged and weaved past the vampire's claws and fangs. She ducked when another swarm of bats flew in front of her. Using Excalibur Mimic, the brunette slashed at the vampire. The monster hissed and descended back into the shadows, bidding his time. Come out, vile heathen. Face me. You're over your head, exorcist. The shadows spat out with hate. Irina felt something behind her and immediately turned around to attack it. Too late. The vampire tilted his head expertly and grabbed the girl's neck in seconds. His wings soon burst out and he took off into the air, holding the exorcist. His bat-like wings flapped with power and he flew off with the exorcist in tow. From the ground, a kneeling Naruto shot out a hand towards the sky. Irina. He growled and bowed his head. He could feel it. It was calling. Urging. He needed to find her. He needed to save Irina. Naruto stood up. As he did, his hands started to revert to back and forth, his clothes started to boil and char. He ignored all of this and ran towards the entrance of the graveyard. As he ran, his head started smoking, but Naruto forced it back. He didn't want to turn into it. Anything but that. He heard it shriek and rage inside him. Gnawing at himself to transform, to feel the rush and adrenaline. To bring the guilty to justice. It was painful. It was stressing. But he resisted, even as more of his body started to tear and open up, flames appearing on his hands and boots, his head smoking and heating up, his jacket charring and boiling. He resisted. Naruto ran wildly through the path that led to the entrance, his mind in a fuzz. Finally, he reached the entrance. His chopper was in the same state as him. The motorcycle's engines roared to life with ferocity and power the last time he used his curse, heating up to the point it turned to fiery yellow-orange color. Flames engulfed the tires, licking the ground it was on. The headlight slowly reverted into a more angular version. It was transforming. Naruto ignored this and straddled it quickly. He revved the engine and flames burst out the exhaust pipes. He raced down the road, fire trailing behind his cycle as he did, narrowly following the flying figure in the sky. Everything was a blur to him, the street lamps and buildings were merely just various colors and textures as he sped by. He could feel himself turning, forming and becoming it. He saw his skin turning into flaming wisps. His body burning and corroding. The voice urged him more, influencing his thoughts. Yes. Do it. Feel the power. Get out of my head. Do you wish to fail her, boy? Get out. We both need each other. Regardless if you like it or not. Get out, 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 get out. He repeated the mantra in his head. No. That was the last straw. Naruto couldn't take it anymore. He lasted as long as he could. The last of his hair and skin burned and singed. His will faded. The rider was back. Irina gently opened her eyes and coughed and hacked. She was flying. No, scratch that, she was captured. You will make a fine feast, exorcist. Unhand me, heathen. Silence, worm. An explosion of fire was heard in the distance. Irina craned her head towards the direction of the fire. What was that? She squinted her eyes and looked down. There was what looked to be a fire from the ground. It was following them. Trailing them. What the who dares? The fiery chain wrapped around the creature's abdomen. The vampire struggled out of the chain's grip and shrieked as it burned him. It was harder to free himself as he was holding someone else. Suddenly, the chain was pulled down, along with the monster and exorcist. Irina screamed and covered her eyes. Thinking quickly, she grabbed the vampire and got on top of him, using the monster as a way to break her fall. Irina looked down and widened her eyes on where they were above. The construction site. This was going to hurt. And it did. They crashed hard. Pebbles were scattered and thrown about as they landed. Irina quickly let go of the vampire and skidded on the ground, away from him. The exorcist stood up, albeit shakily. She was slightly bruised and scratched, not to mention banged up from the crash, but she could handle it. She was still slightly disoriented and tried to summon her sword, only to collapse once more. She panted and watched as the vampire slowly stood up. He too was scratched, his regal clothes and cloak were teared and torn. He was mad. The monster slowly stalked towards her. She was helpless. Another explosion was heard, this time closer than before. The vampire stopped momentarily and looked up. The sound of thunderous engines filled the air. A human-sized ball of flames jumped from the ramp in the construction site and landed in between them. The hellish skeleton, on a chopper that looked like it came from the underworld itself, was in the middle of them, the only thing that stopped the vampire from killing her. Death on wheels never held a truer meaning. The skeleton's flaming skull glanced at Irina briefly before turning towards the vampire with a menacing glower. "You guilty?" Irina looked at the hellish figure clearer and gasped in shock. It was wearing Naruto's clothing. She recognized his clothes. The same silver cross on the skeleton's neck was a clear indication. This was Naruto. The vampire looked at the rider in shock. "Your soul, it feels so powerful, dark, menacing, vengeful," he said. The monster tore his gaze away from the still rider and looked up. "The full moon." He smirked. "You will be my servant," the vampire declared. The rider's blazing orbs glared at the monster. "You can try, but you will only find failure." The monster roared out, baring his fangs once more. The rider quickly disappeared and grabbed the vampire by the throat and lifted him up. The rider leered at the monster. "Your soul is revolting," he stated. "You don't have anything in your heart, only hate and darkness." The skeleton threw the creature with strength, watching the vampire crashing down and getting piled up by construction beams. "It disgusts me." The vampire hissed and turned into darkness itself, slipping out of the mess of construction beams and headed towards the hellish rider. Shadows started to seep from the skeleton's own shadow. Then wrapped around him, only for it to be destroyed in a blaze of fire. Irina shielded her face from the brightness of the mini-explosion. She slowly moved away as to avoid any flames. The shadows hissed in response and moved away, transforming into a black mist that floated up from the ground. The rider held his hand out to the side and summoned a fiery chain. He held the chain with both hands and started spinning one end, much like how cowboys would do in Western movies. He threw the flaming chain and soon caught the floating mist. The rider pulled as the chain forcefully wrapped around the black fog. The vampire was forced to take his normal form again. He howled in rage, struggling to escape the hell chain. With his speed, the vampire tried to speed away, darting from left to right, leaving a few after images in his wake, but to no avail. He was trapped. "You won't escape your judgment." The rider yanked the flaming chain with force. The vampire flew towards the skeleton. Once near contact, the rider made the chain disappear and gave a flaming uppercut, sending the monster up into the sky. Forming another chain, the rider threw it and watched as it wrapped around the vampire in midair, grabbing it with both bony hands. The skeleton pulled down, hard. Unfortunately, the vampire transformed into a bat as he was sent down, letting the flaming chain release him. He soon reverted to his normal form and flew towards Irina. The vampire shot towards the exorcist, fangs extended, intent to drain her blood for nutrients. The rider appeared in front of Irina in a burst of speed and used his arm to block the fangs. The vampire soon screamed in agony as his fangs snapped off, melting away into the pavement. As the vampire backed away in pain, the flaming wraith approached the monster slowly. He held out his hands in front of him and formed a fiery double-barrel shotgun. The rider cocked the hellish weapon and pulled the trigger. A flaming bullet shot from the chamber and flew to the vampire's shoulders. The creature screamed again and held his shoulders. He screamed once more when another bullet went past his abdomen. The wraith formed a hell chain in his other hand and spun it around. Throwing it, the vampire was soon caught again and tried to escape the fiery chain, but it was all for naught. Pulling the vampire towards him, the skeleton stood tall before the kneeling and bleeding creature of the night. "The day of judgment is upon you, scum." Cocking the fiery shotgun, the rider aimed at the vampire's head. "This is your penalty." And he pulled the trigger. The vampire's entire head engulfed in fire as the bullet hit him. He gave out one last, long and agonizing scream before his head melted. The rider released the chain as it disappeared and caught the headless corpse by the neck, lifting it up. The body soon started to char and boil, burning the clothes and cloak. Soon, the body was unrecognizable, the corpse now a charred Ashen body. Using his other flaming hand, the hellish skeleton grabbed the body by the waist and threw it away, not minding as it slowly burned away. Naruto. The rider turned his flaming skull towards the injured Irina, who went out of her cover. She was bruised, holding her side, and limping. Irina. The girl slowly approached the wraith Naruto and stepped closer to him. She slowly brought a hand to the side of his skull. Is this really you? The rider turned his flaming head to the side. Monster. Irina glared at him. No. You aren't. Even if you left the church and betrayed us, you're still Naruto. The rider was silent and turned to look at her. As he craned his head, he started to revert back. His skin reappeared, his hair was back, and the flames slowly died down. Thank you, Irina. And with that, he promptly passed out. Darkness. He could only see darkness. Everywhere, it was pitch black, surrounding him, enveloping him. He felt like he was floating. Where was he? Then, a bright light filled the blackness, blinding him. So, you finally visit me. Naruto opened his eyes and saw a blinding white. Who's there? Face me, Uzumaki. The blonde slowly turned around and was face to face with a flaming skeleton. Ah. Startled, he jumped away and landed in a stance. Calm yourself, boy. The skeleton said. Naruto didn't listen and eyed the skeleton with caution. It looked like him when he transformed, only the skeleton's flames were blue, brighter, and felt more powerful. It had 6 individual spikes around its shoulders, chest, and back. 2 each. It had black bodysuit, coupled with matching boots. Naruto's eyes widened in shock. You. That's right, boy. I am the one who Mephistopheles bonded you with. I am Zarathos. Naruto fell silent as it. No, Zarathos introduced himself. You're the voice in my head. I curse. Zarathos nodded. Yes. I am the one who whispers to you, to urge you. I am the one who influences you. Why? What reason would you have to do this to me? Naruto snapped, shouting at the spirit. What did I do? He demanded. What even are you? The skeleton scoffed. You did nothing, boy. I simply used you, you are my host, the one who punishes the guilty. And as for me, Zarathos gestured to himself. I was once an angel. As if on cue, 2 wings shot from his back. 12 skeletal-like segments that used to be feathers were his wings. Naruto's eyes widened. Why you're a. Zarathos tiled his head forward in a curt confirmation. Correct, boy. I was a seraph. Impossible. Naruto exclaimed. There are only 4 seraph. Zarathos scoffed, his wings moving slightly as he did. You are wrong, Uzumaki. There was 5. I was created by our father, the biblical god. As I said, I was a seraph, strongest of my kind, and an elite in heaven. I was the angel of justice. Zarathos explained. However, during the Great War, when I fought alongside my brothers and sisters, I was sent down to protect man from the devils. But Mephistopheles was nearby. He tricked me and I was sent into the underworld. Naruto stayed silent as he processed the information. As I was trapped in there, Mephistopheles, he corrupted me, tortured me, giving me visions of humanity's depravity. I hoped for Michael, prayed to our father, and wished for Gabriel to save me, to help me as I did them. Zarathos said solemnly. But they never did. He muttered bitterly. They left me there, their own brother, to rot and corrupt. To let the devils do as they wished to me, and Zarathos stopped, realizing his temper flaring at the reminder of his traitorous siblings. Eventually I was driven insane. My mission, my will, to protect the innocent was perverted into a lust to punish the guilty. Zarathos spat out. I became the spirit of vengeance. Zarathos suddenly stopped and looked around before he chuckled. It seems you are waking up. The spirit looked at Naruto. Goodbye for now, Uzumaki. Naruto held out a hand as he started to fade. Wait. He woke up. Naruto shot from whatever he was laying on and gasped. He panted and calmed himself. Where am I? He thought and looked around. The hotel room. Irina must have brought him here. Naruto, are you awake? Speak of the devil. The blonde turned to see the exorcist, now clad in fixed church uniform, in the doorway. Irina approached him in concern. Are you okay? She asked gingerly. Naruto nodded. Yeah, I'm fine. He assured her, scratching his whiskered cheeks. He looked down and noticed that he was only garbed in his orange shirt and pants. Where's my jacket? Irina pointed towards the dresser at the side. Walking towards the wooden dresser, Naruto took out his black leather jacket and put it on. Zipping it up. Shortly after eating breakfast, the two met at the outside of the hotel. Irina, garbed in a white cloak that hid her uniform, watched as Naruto hopped on his motorcycle and turned it on. So, this is goodbye, huh? Naruto looked away. Yeah, I guess it is. The two stayed silent for a moment. Then, without thinking, Irina wrapped her arms around the blonde, pulling him into a hug. The whiskered blonde blinked and looked at her. Aren't you going to kill me? He asked. Irina giggled and pulled away. Maybe next time. She said, smiling brightly. There's that cheerful personality that she was known for. Naruto laughed and gripped the handlebars of his motorcycle. As Irina started to turn around, the blonde shouted, "Irina." The exorcist looked back in surprise. The blonde grinned, "This isn't goodbye. It's a see you later." And with that, he rode off. Irina blinked before her smile returned. "Yeah, see you later, Naruto-kun. You can't be serious, Archangel. Are you questioning me, Uzumaki?" "You're damn right I am. You're ordering me to kill Asia, do you realize how fucked up that is?" The blonde, garbed in priestly robes, shouted at the divine figure with rage in his eyes. Archangel Sariel narrowed his eyes towards the teen in front of him as he sat in his desk. He expected this reaction from the young man. It was no secret in the church that Naruto Uzumaki and Asia Argento cared heavily for each other. But this, Uzumakis were always a trouble to rein in. Sariel would know. Kushina was the same when she was younger. It was a shame that she died. Despite her rather rambunctious and loud personality, the woman had a heart of gold, but her passion and love for her family and friends outweighed her sense duty for the church. Yes, she was loyal to the biblical God, the angels, his people, and her fellow exorcists. But family was always first, in Kushina's mind that is. Looks like the apple didn't fall too far from the tree. From the beginning, Sariel knew Uzumaki Naruto was a good person and an even excellent exorcist, capable of even going toe-to-toe with their strongest, Dulio Gesualdo. But the Archangel also knew that the boy was cursed with a sense of guilt over the death of his mother. He would take the most missions, train the hardest, and try his best to help his fellow brothers and sisters. All to prove to the church and to himself that he was capable of supporting his mother's legacy. However, losing his mother at a rather young age made the boy slightly cynical when he grew older, despite the happy-go-lucky attitude he seemed to project on the outside. Sariel knew that it was just a mask. A mask that was starting to crack. Do not question orders, Uzumaki. You follow them. Do I make myself clear? The Archangel glared at the blonde. This boy was starting to get to his nerves. Naruto gave a glare of his own. One that showed defiance. No. I won't kill Asia. I refuse. There is no option of refusal, boy. You are to eliminate the former holy priestess during her leave in the church. Deny this and you will be eliminated yourself for treachery. Sariel threatened. He didn't want to do this. Really he didn't, this was going against his father's memory, but he needed subordinates that obey orders without question. Duty came before anything else. But Naruto Uzumaki did not seem to understand that. Would Sariel be guilty of killing the boy? Yes, he would. Angels were mostly pacifists, even during the Great War. But it was a necessary sacrifice to be made. The mission always came first, and if that means killing a comrade, then so be it. It was necessary. A necessary evil, if you will. Silence filled the room. Naruto looked down and muttered, "No." Without a second to waste, Naruto flipped the table his arms previously supported, shocking and stunning the Archangel of Death long enough for the blonde to run to the door. Shortly, after what the boy said registered in Sariel's mind, Naruto was already out. Shooting up from his chair, the angel seethed. Stop him at all costs. Eliminate Uzumaki Naruto before he escapes the Vatican. Outside, Naruto dodged and weaved through other exorcists' attacks and bullets. Ducking over a kick, the teen sent an uppercut to the unlucky man and continued his path to the church doors. Reaching the doors, Naruto stopped momentarily and glanced back. He grimaced when he noticed a handful of exorcists making their way to him. He breathed deeply and kicked open the large doors. Freedom. Running out of the church, Naruto quickly spotted his parked black chopper, a motorcycle used during his missions, just a few feet away from his position. Perfect. With no time to spare, the soon-to-be ex-exorcist hopped on the chopper and slotted the keys into the ignition. The chopper roared to life, twisting the handlebar a few times. He quickly rode off. The hunt was on. When he first transformed, he was scared, frightened, terrified, horrified. What did he become? He had no control of his actions as he punished the guilty the first night he transformed. His body was burned and charred, possessed by an angel-turned-fallen that had a dark obsession of punishing the guilty. He remembered the feeling of horror and shock when he started to burn. The insanity and the laughter that echoed in his head. He became hysterical, maniacal, to the point that he would often laugh as the rider's personality took over. Even now, he still had little to no control over this power. At least he got better over time, making it so that the rider would be able to speak in full sentence. Rather than growl or act animalistic as he used to do. So while the rider was in control, he could only influence his decisions to an extent, taking a back seat as the rider terrorized the sinners. Zarathos was really something else. An angel, one of the famed seraphim, and the proclaimed angel of justice to boot. Deceived by Mephistopheles himself and captured by the devils during the Great War between the three factions. Tortured by his faction's enemies to the point where he went insane. Even if it happened centuries ago, it seemed that the spirit of vengeance still harbored great resentment over his traitorous siblings for leaving him to rot in the underworld. Michael and Gabriel especially. But it was understandable. Any man or woman would hold a grudge if any of their family would leave them in the dust. Zarathos was still mentally unstable, but just recently retained enough sanity to not show it. This was the very reason that he hadn't made contact or interacted with Naruto since they were bonded together a year ago. Zarathos was still rabid and insane when he took control of Naruto for the very first time. Becoming more and more irrational and moved only by his main instinct, feeding. Consumed by the hunger of consuming souls and punishing the guilty. Zarathos quickly took advantage of the young ex-exorcist by any means necessary. Naruto was just thankful that the fallen angel managed to get at least some of his sanity back. Currently the ex-exorcist was riding down a road, his chopper's engine giving out a quiet hum as he did. "So, if you're a fallen angel, why don't you have black wings?" The blonde asked the spirit of vengeance, breaking the silence. "Or an actual face than a skull." But in Naruto, Zarathos glared at his host. "Watch your mouth, brat. As for your question, I use the term loosely. I am both a fallen angel, yet at the same time, I am not." "How, exactly?" "When I was in the underworld, Mephistopheles forcefully tried to bring me into his peerage." Zarathos explained, sadly for him, the fool's plan didn't work and so, in anger and humiliation, bonded me with a human, an act to spite and mock me for his failure to change me to his pet. By doing this, he tainted me with his magic, corrupting me further, and thus turned me into a fallen angel, Zarathos said. "But don't mistake me as any of my perverted fool of a brother, Azazil's followers. For instead of becoming a true fallen angel, I became the spirit of vengeance." Naruto stayed silent, pursing his lips as he furrowed his eyebrows in thought. "The human that Mephistopheles bonded you with, who was it?" He couldn't help but ask. Zarathos stayed silent. "His name was Carter Slade." "Carter Slade," Naruto muttered under his breath. "A mystery to solve for another time." After an hour of driving, he finally made it to his destination. Kuoh. Naruto looked around the small city as drove through the streets. It seemed normal enough, buildings surrounding his sides, occasional trees and bushes, a forest here and there, and a park. This place, the blonde heard Zarathos start. Naruto knew what Zarathos was thinking. This city was full of demonic aura. This city reeks of devils. Zarathos spat out with venom in his tone. His mind flashing back to all the horrendous torture he had to endure due to those blasted creatures. "Hurry your business here and let us leave this foul town occupied by these heathens." The whiskered blonde's eye twitched and grabbed his gloved hand. It was starting to burn again. The leather of his glove was charring and boiling. "Shit. Zarathos, do you sense that?" "Indeed I do, brat. Fallen angels most likely." Naruto gritted his teeth and held his head before shaking it forcefully. "How many?" he asked, closing his eyes to calm himself down. "One. Though I feel a presence nearby. At the abandoned church." "Just my luck." The team grumbled. Zarathos suddenly growled. "Are you okay? I sense a powerful soul." Naruto cringed and doubled over in pain, his skin started to nick away, fading like wisps as they burned from his head. "Stop this, Zarathos." Naruto pleaded, but it fell on deaf ears as the fallen seraph started to growl in an animalistic fashion. "Damn it, you walking skeleton. I can't do this right now." Naruto shouted at the former seraph, who only roared in a bestial-like manner in response. "HMPH. Another stray. And I came all the way here for a mere human." The blonde immediately rolled away as light spears hit the pavement. Naruto looked up and narrowed his eyes. Above him was a man with short black hair, covered by a fedora, his dark blue eyes looking down, both literally and figuratively. He wore a pale gray trench coat over a white dress shirt with a matching ascot. Black wings sprouting from his back. The fallen angel. The fallen angel leered over him, looking him over, judging him. "Interesting. You have a scent of the devil, yet I feel holy magic coming from you," he observed. Taking note of the boy's presence. The Kabyl would want to hear about this. Naruto glared at him. "Who are you?" he demanded. Forming a fiery chain in one of his hands. The fallen angel scoffed. "You wish to know my name?" He smirked. "Very well. My name is Dohnaseek." With that, the man summoned 2 light spears in his hands. "Now, prepare to die." Quickly, Naruto dodged the oncoming barrage of light spears. He held his other hand out and formed a silver, devilish-looking pistol. Pulling the trigger, the pistol unleashed bullet after bullet, all speeding towards Dohnaseek. The winged man laughed as he evaded the flaming bullets. "Is that all you got, boy? Pathetic." He cackled. As he was distracted, Naruto threw the chain towards the fallen angel, successfully hooking and wrapping the flaming mystical chain on one of his wings. "Why don't you face me down here?" With a quick and strong tug, the man was sent crashing down sideways. Dohnaseek growled and stood up. "You think you can beat me?" Naruto ran to the winged man in seconds when he noticed him trying to form another light spear. "Oh no, you don't." The blonde formed a shotgun and fired point-blank towards the fallen angel. The man cried out in pain as the bullet struck him. He staggered back more and more as the ex-exorcist advanced, firing the demonic shotgun as he did. "How do you like that, Tobeo? Insolent brat." Snarling, the man's wings spread further and he charged towards the blonde. As the fallen angel was mere inches away, Naruto jumped to the left as to avoid the winged man. "Answer me, Zarathos." The blonde thought silently. A low, animalistic growl was what he heard. Naruto cried a pained shout and collapsed to his knees. His jacket started to char and boil as his hair started to singe. He forced back the effects as best as he could. "Eyes on the prize, boy." The whiskered blonde snapped his head towards Dohnaseek's voice, only for the fallen angel to tackle him and brought the both of them to the air. Dohnaseek flew them till the lights down below were merely smudges of color, the city a mix of gray and green. The winged man grabbed the blonde by the collars of his jacket and sneered at the boy. "I can sense your powers, boy," he said, an edge in his tone. The fallen angel ignored the blonde's charring clothes, heeding no mind to it. "You're holding back." The man pulled the boy closer as he seethed. "Fight me at your strongest," Dohnaseek demanded. Naruto opened his eyes and glared heatedly at the man. "You want to fight?" Dohnaseek's eyes widened when, for a split second, the boy's face somehow distorted to a skull, before reverting back to his tanned skin and marked cheeks. Naruto's head twitched, as did his body. Zarathos' influence slowly taking control. And he started to laugh. Much to the confusion to the fallen angel holding him by his jacket, Dohnaseek looked at the blonde oddly as he started to laugh, almost maniacally. A laugh one would hear from a person who lost their minds. The boy started twitching, almost as if he were possessed, his head started smoking, and the fallen angel could feel the blonde's body started growing hotter. Then, in a burst of fire, Dohnaseek was knocked away. "You got one." A chain, the same weapon that the brat used, wrapped around his neck and pulled him towards the mini-explosion. Dohnaseek opened his eyes and was met face to face with a black charred skull enveloped by flames. The skull laughed insanely, eerily sounding similar to the blonde human that he fought earlier. In fact, the charred skeleton was wearing the same thing as the boy, only his clothes were boiling, charred, and blacked, much like the skeleton itself. Or rather he even had the same orange shirt beneath the jacket. Only the shirt was in the same state as the rest of the clothes. Dohnaseek connected the dots. This was the boy. "So, you show your true powers, eh?" The fallen angel sneered as the skeleton grasped the man by the neck. Though, inwardly, Dohnaseek was panicking. Such power. It feels more powerful than Sama's. Dohnaseek thought in panic, this boy's power, it felt strong, like a blazing inferno, a raging fire that not even a storm could put out. It was powerful. No. This human can't be stronger than Sama. Dohnaseek assured himself. No way can a mere human ever hope to beat his superior. Much less this blonde brat. The fallen angel struggled to free himself from the skeleton's grasp. The skeleton merely laughed at the man's attempts and wrapped his fiery chain once more on the fallen's neck. As they descended, the charred wraith moved to the winged man's back and stood up as they fell. Dohnaseek cried out in protest when he felt boots being planted on his wings. The chains on his neck tightened as the flaming skeleton pulled upwards, tightening his hold towards the fallen angel. The skeleton pulled again, relishing in the sounds of Dohnaseek choking in pain as he desperately clawed the chain for air. "Brace for impact." The fallen angel groaned when they crashed, making a small crater in the park. Dohnaseek felt a charred glove hold his neck once again as he was pulled up from the mini-crater. The flaming wraith pulled the fallen closer towards his blackened skull and stared at the stunned man. The skeleton threw the fallen with force, watching as Dohnaseek skidded on the ground with a pained groan of protest. The winged man gritted his teeth in frustration. How dare this brat? No. He was not going to be beat by some brat. A human no less. He would never hear the end of it if Rainer or Caloriner were to hear about this. Flapping his wings, Dohnaseek took off, heading towards the abandoned church where they held the nun. The Gremory girl's peerage no doubt already there, but he had some faith that Rainer would be able to stall in time. The skeleton turned his head as the fallen angel flew away hastily. He growled lowly, like a predator, dissatisfied at seeing their prey escape. He started walking. After a few steps, his chopper, now in its hellish state, appeared. The flaming wraith jerked his flaming chain like a whip. The chains responded in command and started wrapping itself around the skeleton's charred jacket, fitting snugly as they did. His charred clothes crinkled noticeably as straddled his ride. Revving the engines, the skeleton took off after the fallen, leaving a trail of fire in his wake. "This one's for Asia." Issei Haidu cried out as sent a powerful uppercut towards Rainer, sending the fallen angel flying out the window of the church, screaming as did. He panted as he glared at the shattered glass where Rainer went through, the bat-like wings on his back folding up and disappearing. That felt good. With that, the brown-haired teen nearly collapsed from exhaustion. After everything that's happened, fighting Rainer, Asia dying, and advancing his sacred gear, the only thing he wanted to do now was rest. Thankfully, Kiba helpfully supported him, putting an arm around him to help him up. The pretty boy chuckled. "Look at you handling that on your own," he said, smiling. "Yeah, thanks." Issei offered a weak smile of his own. What held you up? I was instructed to stay back, Kuoh explained. But you's orders sorry. He apologized. Seriously? Seriously? Aisa turned his head towards the side and saw his king standing there, leaning against a smooth concrete wall, her crimson hair flawlessly going down her back and her breasts as big as ever. I for life. Rias smiled at her servant, I believed in you. I knew you would defeat her. Aisa blinked. You did? The devil nodded. Once my business was finished, I found my way to the basement and arrived just in time to see Kuoh and Kaneko having a free-for-all with the fallen angels. The knight smiled gratefully towards his master. I didn't know that we wouldn't have gotten out of it without you, but you. Aisa looked surprised at the information. Oh man, sorry that I missed it. The doors to the church swung open. The three turned their heads to see their fellow peerage member, Kaneko, dragging the beaten Rainer towards them with her usual emotionless facade. Did someone order this? She asked, dropping the fallen angel harshly, her stoic demeanor in place. Rias approached the fallen with grace, stopping in front of the winged woman and looking down at her. You must be Rainer, lovely entrance. She mused. The devil placed a hand on her hip. My name is Rias Gremory. Also known as the next head of the house of Gremory. She introduced herself. Rainer looked up in shock, beads of sweat running down her face at the fact. Rias smiled at her, as if she were an old friend. It's wonderful to meet you. A shame that we don't have time to chat. And sadly, lifting her arm up, she unclenched her fist, releasing black feathers that used to belong to the fallen's former comrades, Middled and Calwerner. They were rather rude to me. So you killed them? Aisa asked curiously, what was he saying? Of course she killed them. But Yuz is normally not one to blow her fuse, but when pushed, she lives up to her title as Princess of Destruction. Kuoh informed the boy. Damn. Aisa muttered. Rainer stared at the devil, why would the heiress of Gremory do such a thing? Well, since you asked. Rias smiled, after your friend, Dohnaseek attacked my cute little servant. I discovered multiple fallen angels occupying this town. Normally, I would stay out of this, but since you insist on attacking my servants, I intervened. Rias frowned in realization, speaking of Dohnaseek, where is he? Right here. You. Aisa shouted in anger. All heads snapped towards the new figure floating near the shattered window that Rainer crashed out of. Despite looking disheveled and battered, Dohnaseek glared right back at the sacred gear user. He glanced at Rainer and sked, looks like I put too much faith in you. He sneered at the girl, who looked away in shame. Man, what a shitty reunion. Everyone all looked at the altar and saw a white-haired man, garbed in priestly garments, sitting at the top, his foot dangling. Freed. Rainer cried out, save me. What's in it for me, Freed asked, before grinning lecherously, how about you let me fuck that hot ass of yours? He offered. Anything. Just save me. As Freed opened his mouth to respond, Dohnaseek spoke. Nevertheless, Rainer, you did he stopped suddenly, and his expression turned to horror and alarm, confusing the devils, fallen angel, and stray exorcist. Shit. The brat followed me. Before anyone could respond to anything to what the winged man said, the sound of an engine was heard in the distance. Soon, the sound got louder and louder. Before a fiery motorcycle burst through the church doors. The motorcycle landed as the devils jumped away from the blast that occurred when the chopper landed. Dohnaseek paled as the brat got off the burning chopper. Rias and her peerage managed to land in a safe distance as they watched the new intruder. Who the hell is that? Aisa wondered, speaking out on what his fellow members were thinking. Kaneko sniffed, smells like devil, but yet not. She said, confused. Rias stayed silent and observed the newcomer with a calculating eye. Even if she looked calm on the inside, she was inwardly alarmed at how much power, not to mention holy energy, the newcomer radiated. It was large, incredibly so, matching up on even her brother's power in comparison. The flaming wraith in front of them almost felt like devil, but at the same time, not. She had to be wary of this possible enemy. The flaming skeleton looked at Dohnaseek and twitched, almost like a man possessed, and formed a fiery chain, which immediately shot up and caught the unsuspecting fallen, wrapping around his torso. Dohnaseek struggled against the flaming weapon, but was all for naught as the charred skeleton started to swing the chain, bringing the fallen angel along, knocking the man against the walls and pillars of the church. The flaming skeleton grabbed the chain with both hands and tugged downwards, sending the fallen towards him, rearing his leg as he did so. When the winged man was near, the wraith kicked the fallen angel, knocking him away, destroying a few pews as he did. Dohnaseek struggled to stand up, only to collapse as he tried. He looked back and widened his eyes in fear as the wraith neared him. Have mercy. The man begged. The skeleton gripped his chain on both of its sides and tugged it, imbuing the chain with more hellfire. Sorry, all out of mercy. He swung his chain and let it wrap around the fallen angel once again. The chain started burning more and more as Dohnaseek screamed in agony. Slowly, the devils watched as the fallen angel burned at a rapid pace, before all that remained was a charred corpse. Boy, don't forget about me, you bag of bones. With a malicious grin, Freed joined the fight. Taking out two holy swords, the stray exorcist charged at the skeleton and slashed at him. The flaming rider saw this and grabbed both of Fried's arms before the swords could make contact. The skeleton reared his flaming skull and headbutted Fried. The stray exorcist cried out in pain as he stepped back a few feet, rubbing his forehead. Taking out a gun that he used as an exorcist, Fried rapidly shot at the skeleton, only for the flaming being to dodge in speeds, looking almost as if he teleported. The flaming wraith dodged the attack and grabbed Fried by the neck. "Fried Selson," the flaming skeleton said. "Your time has come." "Bite me," was all Fried could say as his hands clawed for escape. Picking the flaming wraith, Fried successfully escaped from the grab. He looked at Rainer. "Sorry bitch. But you're not worth dying." With a laugh, the man disappeared using smoke bombs. The flaming wraith shook his skull to rid of the excess smoke before approaching the last fallen angel. "Your soul." Rainer backed away with terrified eyes as the skeleton advanced. She screamed when the flaming wraith grabbed her, and she was met with black holes that seemed to stare at her like the abyss. "Is tainted." Slowly, the skeleton's jaw unhinged and he hissed lowly, staring into the fallen angel's eyes. A heartbeat passed, and then another, before Rainer screamed in deep pain. Her eyes never leaving the blackness that she was seeing. Her scream echoing through the walls of the church. But she wasn't the only one screaming. The agony, the pain, the utter torture she did against others were all coming back to her, haunting her. Rainer dropped down and slumped to the side. Aisa resisted the urge to puke when he saw the once violet eyes of the fallen angel, now a charcoal color that looked molten. Her body soon started decaying rapidly, and in minutes, only a dirty skeleton was what was left of the fallen. The flaming wraith turned his skull towards them. The devils tensed, readying themselves in case of a fight. He ignored them and slowly approached a nearby pew at the front of the altar. The pew that held the body of Asia Argento. With gentleness, the skeleton's charred gloved hands grabbed Asia's body gingerly, as if he were afraid that she would break at the slightest touch, and lifted her up, carrying her in his arms. The charred skull looked down on Asia's face. To the devils, it almost looked like the skull had a look of deep regret and sorrow. "Asia," Aisa shouted, stepping forward, intent to stop the wraith, only for Rias to block his path with her hand. Gulping silently, the Gremory walked forward, much to her servant's protests, and approached the flaming being. "I can help her," she stated directly, no use beating around the bush. The wraith tilted his head, allowing Rias to continue. Fishing out her bishop piece, the high-class devil showed it to the skeleton. "I can reincarnate her to become one of my peerage members. With this, I can resurrect her," she informed the flaming wraith. The rider was silent, contemplating on what she said. Carefully, the skeleton laid down Asia on the ground as the others started to approach. Rias took a deep breath. A red magic circle soon appeared around the nun's body as Rias held out the bishop piece and placed it on Asia's chest. The beauty started to chant incarnations as the red energy started getting brighter and subsequently stronger. Soon, Asia's ring started to glow green once more. The chest piece sunk into Asia's chest and she was revived. The flaming wraith collapsed to his knees and to the devil's eyes, started reverting back. His skin started growing back, so did his hair. His jacket and clothes stopped looking charred and burned. The mop of spiky, blonde hair was the Rias and the others saw, and soon, the teen's face was revealed, a healthy tan shade as whisker marks appeared on his cheeks. The Keno licked her lips, eyeing the teen. Rias could admit that the teen was rather handsome, though she did note the cross dangling from his neck. Asia sat up slowly, as if she just awoke from deep slumber. Where was she? Asia, a familiar voice spoke. She turned her head and widened her eyes in recognition. It had been a few years since she last saw him when he acted as her bodyguard, but he hadn't changed that much. Same spiky blonde hair, same beautiful yet cold blue eyes, though there was a twinkle of happiness. He even had the same face which betrayed little emotions. The only person aside from Aisa that she thought would arrive here to rescue her from the hands of her captor. Her beloved friend from her youth. Her protector. Naruto. Asia exclaimed happily and engulfed him into a tight hug as tears slowly started to form in her eyes. "You're here." Naruto closed his eyes and hugged Asia back. "Yeah. I'm here. And that's all that mattered." Rias Gremory sighed deeply as she sat on the couch that her peerage members usually occupied in the Orc. Currently, she was alone in the clubroom. Her servants doing their duties by handing out flyers to various people in Kuoh. She looked down as she thought of the events that transpired last night. While she was glad that she had gotten a bishop on her side, not to mention one that had a useful sacred gear, she now also had to be wary of the new player that entered the game. Naruto Uzumaki. From what Asia told them, Naruto was an exorcist when the girl was still with the church and was a strong one at that. He was also her bodyguard up until he had to move to the Vatican. By what the former nun told them, the Uzumaki was supposedly a skilled exorcist, capable of even going against the church's current strongest. Though, by the looks of it, she was going to assume that the blonde went rouge, considering that Asia was excommunicated by the church. But that was not what worried her. What worried the heiress was the enigmatic blonde's power. The power to change into the same wraith they had encountered last night. The demonic energy that the boy released was powerful, up to the point that she almost felt like she was in her brother's presence whenever he actually got mad, rarely as he did. Though she did felt holy energy which also had the same size as its demonic counterpart. This obviously worried her, seeing as she might have to deal with another possible enemy. Which led her to what she was about to do now. The white magic circle suddenly appeared before her and Rias straightened her posture. As the light died down, it revealed a silver-haired woman dressed in a maid uniform, along with a handsome man who had the same shade of red hair and blue-green eyes. Cirzich Lucifer and his wife, Graphia Lucifuge. Both were known as very powerful devils and were prominent figures during the Great War. Cirzich was once called Cirzich Gremory, but after killing the old four Satans, had taken up the name Lucifer as his title as a Satan. He was known as kind, caring, and even swayed Graphia to their side during the war, where they fell in love. They were power couple, unrivaled in strength and power. But that love could not be compared for the love Cirzich had for his little sister. In short, he was a full-on siskin to the max. Riatan. Come give your big brother a hug. Cirzich exclaimed happily, arms spread out as he grinned. Graphia's eye twitched as she walked up to her king and husband. Cirzich Sama, she muttered softly. Then proceeded to painfully pull his ear, ignoring the Satan's cries of protest. Please act your age. She asked, a tone of authority in her voice as she continued to punish her husband. Graphia-chan, that hurts. Cirzich whined, only for the maid to further the pain, successfully quieting the Satan. As Cirzich grumbled in the sidelines, holding his now readier. Rias smiled at her sister-in-law, thank you for that, Graphia. She thanked the devil. Graphia nodded politely in response, it is my duty, Rias Sama. After a few seconds, Cirzich compassed himself and smiled at his little sister. Now, what matter is so urgent that you need to call us for? He asked. That's the thing, Ani-sama. Last night, after my pawn disobeyed me to save a nun that the fallen angels captured a few days ago. We encountered an ex-exorcist with a rather peculiar power. Graphia raised an eyebrow at that. That's it, Rias-sama. I can't seem to see what an exorcist would grant a meeting with us here. She told the girl. Normally I would agree with you, Graphia, but his power. It just felt demonic, yet at the same time angelic. Rias attempted to explain, feeling confused herself on what she said herself. This exorcist's power radiated off him in waves. It even almost felt comparable to your auras. She continued. As she described the events and the exorcist's abilities, Rias noticed that Graphia and Cirzich looked more and more shocked and nervous, an expression that she rarely saw on their faces. Is something wrong, Ani-sama? Rias Cirzich started, this exorcist, did he use a flaming transportation of any kind? Was he using chains? And by chance was he a skeleton on fire? Rias nodded. Yes, he did, Ani-sama. He used a motorcycle that looked demonic in nature and killed one of the fallen using chains. She confirmed he was even a skeleton when he did that, but he later transformed to a human. Rias said. She looked at her brother with a questioning look. How did you know that? Both ultimate devils stayed silent. Ani-sama, Graphia. The Satan looked at his wife. Cirzich-sama. You can't possibly think it's him. Graphia looked at her husband incredulously. If what she's saying is true, Graphia, then it must be. Cirzich insisted. Ani-sama. Cirzich sighed, it seems you don't know. He closed his eyes for a moment before looking at his little sister. Tell me, do you know the legend of the Ghost Rider? The heiress blinked. What? Was her response. Legend? What legend? Do you know Mephistopheles, Rias? The devil who formed a pact with a human? Cirzich asked. I know Mephistopheles, Ani-sama. Rias said, he once made a deal with a man named Johann Georg Faust during the 1500s. She recounted, remembering the history lesson her mother once gave her. Well, that is something that humans remember him by. That was not the first time he made deals with humans. Cirzich said, long ago, during the Great War. Mephistopheles never did get along with the old Satan faction and even hated them for their nature of dominance. So, he did not side with them, nor did he side with us. Then what did he do? Rias asked, curious to know why neither of the Satan factions didn't do anything to a neutral entity. He remained in the underworld and stayed out of the war. Cirzich said, but that's what most of the younger generation knew. The Satan waited for a few moments. In reality, Mephistopheles tricked an angel, a seraph, and brought him to the underworld. The seraph, Rias said in surprise and shock, controlling her voice as to not shout. Yes. Zarathos, the angel of justice, was trapped in the underworld. Cirzich nodded. Mephistopheles then tortured him in secret as the old and new Satan factions, along with the angels and fallen angels, fought. He told her. Eventually, Mephistopheles corrupted Zarathos to the point that Zarathos went insane and changed. Changed into what, Ani-sama? Rias asked softly. He changed into a fallen angel, per se. Surzich said, not exactly as the fallen angels you know of, but was corrupted by sin and demonic energy. The ultimate class devil explained. Zarathos' goal to protect the innocent changed to an obsession to punish the guilty and the damned. The Satan sighed, running a hand through his red hair. This was one of the reasons the Great War lasted as long as it did. The angels, the seraphim specifically, were understandably furious at the news of their brother and so fought more fiercely than before. Surzich grimly said, remembering the brutal bloodshed and fall of devils due to the angels' newfound fury. Ani-sama, well, this is a shocking reveal of history. What does this have to do with this legend you're talking about? Rias asked, wondering how this all connected to the legend her brother spouted. As the war progressed, Mephistopheles made a deal with a human and bonded Zarathos with that human, effectively making that human Zarathos' host, making that same human into his bounty hunter. A catastrophe that rampaged around the world, punishing the sinners, sending the guilty down to hell, making the human a ghost rider. Rias realized. Surzich nodded. Yes. He confirmed his sister's statement. And if what you're saying is true, then you just found the current host of Zarathos. I see. Rias looked down, digesting the newfound information her brother gave her. Have you ever encountered a ghost rider, Ani-sama? Rias asked, looking up from her lap to meet her brother's form. Only once. The Lucifer nodded. During the Wild West period. The golden age of cowboys. I met a ghost rider wandering the deserts. Surzich said. I could still remember seeing his flaming horse, it was a sight to see. He chuckled. Despite our difference in factions. He helped me in dealing with a few strays during my free time. 1. The ultimate class devil looked at the clock hung above the orc clubroom and stood up, his queen following his movements. Nevertheless, Rias. Be wary. Even with your control over the power of destruction, you and your peerage will stand little chance against Zarathos' host, should you ever face him. Ria's eyes widened at how even her brother told her how powerful this ghost rider was. I will, Ani-sama. Rias nodded. Surzich smiled at her as the same white light appeared under him and Graphia. Take care, Ria-tan. In a flash of light, the ultimate class devils were gone. Ria sighed deeply and fell down the couch, slumping as she did. She felt mentally drained just from what her brother told her. A piece of history that prolonged the Great War, kept secret to the younger generations of devils like herself and Sona, not to mention that her worries for how dangerous Uzumaki Naruto could be, was increased tenfold, exhausted her. If what her brother was correct, then Uzumaki had one of the most powerful, former angel inside him. An exorcist, a skilled one at that. Add to the fact that her new bishop cared deeply for him. This was getting complicated. She shook her head and stood up. She needed a shower. Rias said, bringing a hand to her forehead as she watched her pawn run laps around the park that littered Kuoh. The ones near his house, specifically where the playgrounds were. Like most playgrounds, the place had the set used to entertain kids, a swing set there, monkey bar here, and teeter-totters at the edge. All of which were built in a small lot of sand. Surrounding the lot was a grassy field with trees throughout. Currently, Rias and her peerage occupied the area, her servants exercising to keep their respective strengths up. While she, on the other hand, was trying to raise her pawn's stamina and strength up. The pervert in question panted as his legs tried their best to carry him. He was already in his 10th lap, nearing 11th, and he felt like shit. Despite his increase in stamina thanks to his reincarnation as a devil. The scared gear user still had little energy, even if boosted up. I know you're trying hard, but it wouldn't hurt to work a little harder. Rias advised, looking at her servant as the pawn tried to desperately to continue running, to the point that he was crawling. It's no use, Aisa panted, his hands digging towards the dirt as he struggled on. I'm at my limit. But that said, the pawn face planted right in the dirt. His ragged breaths muffled by soil and grass. But you. Maybe I could motivate Aisa-kun to do more, if you let me of course. Akeno, dressed in a tracksuit asked, licking her lips as she did so, a spark of lightning dancing at her fingertips. The king shook her head, it's okay, Akeno, I can handle this. If you say so, but you. As her queen walked away, a thought occurred to her. You know, Aisa, she started, a devious smile on her face. Perhaps if you work really hard, I would be willing to give you reward. Aisa widened his eyes at the prospect of a reward, thoughts of his king's Ophis and her undressing starting to fill his mind. A second passed, then another. Rias sighed silently, she thought that would war. Suddenly, Aisa was back at it, running around the area with a perverted look on his face. All the while screaming for Ophis. At the sidelines, Kiba, in a tracksuit of his own, chuckled lightly at his fellow members' excitement. Kaneko, also in a tracksuit, stared at the running sacred gear user and shook her head with disdain. Pervert. Was all she said. The heiress shook her head. He didn't even allow her to say what the reward was before he even started. Sorry I'm late. Aisa, Kaneko, Akeno, Kiba and Rias stopped what they were doing. All heads turned to see Aisa running towards them, waving one hand in the air while the other was holding onto a small blanket. Like the others, she too was wearing a tracksuit. There was a large smile on her face and it was clear to the other peerage members that she was not watching where she was going. Ai-san. Akeno-san. Kaneko-san. Kiba-san. Butchuo. I'm sorry, I was running la Kaya. Before the others could warn her, Asia stepped into the sand lot they were using. And tripped. Everyone watched in mute shock as the girl fell down towards the sand lot. Until a gloved hand grabbed her by the shoulder, stopping her fall. Asia's eyes were closed even as she was helped up. After a few moments, she opened it. Huh? She asked herself. She thought she fell, shouldn't she be kissing the sand by now? You okay, Asia-chan? She turned her head sideways. And was met face to face with her beloved friend from her youth. He was standing there, a gloved hand on her shoulder. His outfit the same as before the last night she saw it, only this time, they didn't look charred nor burned. His normal cold blue eyes gave a twinkle of happiness as he looked at her, and he had a soft smile on his face. Oddly emphasizing his whisker marks. Naruto-san. She exclaimed and engulfed the ex-exorcist in a hug, not minding the chains wrapped around his torso as she did. Thank you for saving me. She said gratefully. No need to thank me, Asia-chan. The blonde softly said, his eyes briefly traveled to the group of devils and they hardened for a moment, no doubt his instincts as an exorcist kicking in, that and Zarathos burning up inside him at the mere sight of the creatures. But he reined in his ingrained sense to fight his former faction's enemies. Even if the three factions were currently in a sort of state of peace. Aren't you a hero, Uzumaki-kun? Akeno said teasingly, eyeing the blonde teen as he and Asia approached the peerage members. Naruto ignored the queen and approached the Gremory heiress. He gave his gloved hand out in a handshake, Rias Gremory, a pleasure to officially meet you. He struggled to say as he did, Zarathos' influence trying to take control, to which he forced back. Rias shook his hand with her own. Her soft hand feeling the leather texture of the blonde's covered hand. To you as well, Naruto Uzumaki. She said with a smile, having been groomed to handle situations like these. Wasn't this a good start? Here you go. Asia held out a small canister with tea to say. The group of devils, including one ex-exorcist, sat around the sand lot as the former nun handed out tea to everyone. Thank you, Naruto-san. Asia turned to her dear friend, I'm sorry I don't have an extra cup, I didn't realize that you would be here. She held out her own cup and looked at him shyly. But if you want, you can drink some tea in mine, she offered. I'm fine, Asia-chan. Naruto gave a small smile as he patted her in the head. Even during their time in the church, the girl was starved for affection. Asia seemed disappointed but looked pleased when the older blonde patted her head, much like he did when they were younger. Thank you, anyways. Asia giggled softly with a flushed face. Asia, Issei said, glaring at the whiskered blonde. That blonde bastard already had Asia's affection, and by the looks of it, Akeno-senpai seemed to be warming up to him, even Butchuo too. Like hell was he going to let him take Kaneko's? Why were you late? Ah. Asia blushed and looked at her lap. When Butchuo told me about having an exercise with the others, I wanted to help you out, but I wasn't able to think of anything except make tea. Sniffling was heard, followed by a sob. Everyone looked at Issei, who wiped his eyes with his sleeve, crying tears of joy. I can't believe it. I've finally had some good luck. I must be truly blessed to have a cute girl like you to say such nice things to me. As Issei cried manly tears. Naruto took Asia's cup and sipped some tea. His eyes grew a bit at the feeling of the warm liquid. Huh, this is good. He sipped a bit more. Asia-chan would make a great wife one day. The blonde suddenly spoke. Wife, Asia squeaked out, her face beet red. Looking as if her face overheated while steam poured out her ears. Naruto-kun, you shouldn't say such embarrassing things. She frantically smacked the chuckling blonde with her arms. Squeaking loudly as she began to apologize profusely. As this happened, Issei's manly tears of joy turned to tears of jealousy and anger. Damn you, whiskered blonde. First you're getting Butchuo and Akeno-senpai's attention, now you're planning to marry Asia, he exclaimed, his cartoonish tears streaking down on his face. The pawn pointed at the blonde with a dramatic finger. I'll never forgive you for this. Naruto stopped and looked at Issei, then turned back to Asia. Hey. Stop ignoring me, you bastard. Rias looked on with a smile on her face as her other servant started to warm up to the ex-exorcist. Maybe he wasn't so bad after all. A saddened expression filled her face as she looked down at her lap. She didn't have much time before Riser appeared. She looked up and stared at the whiskered blonde, her brows furrowed and a thought popped in her head. Maybe she could. No. She denied herself before the thought could further. It's too risky to reincarnate him. She thought, with how much power Naruto had inside him, it would be a miracle if she could even bring him to her peerage. Not to mention that Zarathos would be very resistant to the change. But you? Akeno's voice cut the heiress off her thoughts. The queen looked at her with concerned eyes. Are you alright? she asked softly, already knowing what the red-haired beauty's dilemma was about. I'm fine, Akeno, it's just that Rias bit her lip and looked away. Don't worry, but you. Akeno reassured her, we will beat him, we always have your back, Rias. She said softly. Rias looked down, before looking at her queen with a smile. Thank you, Akeno. Naruto rode in silence as he maneuvered his chopper that followed the stone path. He tilted his handlebars and deviated from the main path that went to Kuoh Academy. Soon, he parked his motorcycle in front of the footsteps of an old Victorian-style building. It looked old, from what he could see, judging from the moss and leaves that grew on the exterior. He got off his chopper and climbed the steps towards the steps and approached the double doors. He grasped the handles of the wooden doors and opened it. And was greeted by the sight of what he expected. Rias was sitting behind her desk, a grave frown on her face. Standing beside her was Akeno. The other peerage members were all sitting on the couches of the clubroom. What the blonde didn't expect was to see a gorgeous woman with silver hair and a maid outfit that stood next to the Gremory heiress. All heads turned to him. Is this a bad time? The maid looked at the boy with a stern look. Young man, I don't think. She stopped and her expression was changed with a shocked look. Inside Naruto, Zarathos growled like an animal. Lucifuge, he muttered lowly. You know her? Meanwhile with Graphia, her thoughts were on the whiskered blonde. The boy's power felt like his. Could this boy be? The strongest queen casted a glance towards Rias, who nodded discreetly. Confirming the maid's suspicions. I see, Graphia said under her breath. You? Issei pointed at him, catching the ex-exorcist's attention. The hell are you doing here? I'm here to visit Asia-chan. The blonde answered, taking a seat on the other couch, one leg crossed over the other and stretched his arms over the headrest. But considering this is a bad time, just as Naruto moved to stand up, an orange glow began emitting from the floor, stopping the blonde from standing up. There was just enough time to see the magic circle with an unfamiliar crest came to life on the carpet before the crest burst into flames. Whoever was doing this, they had a dramatic flair, he'd give them that. Before the flames fully dispersed, a figure appeared to inside the fire. A gust of wind put the blaze out, revealing the person who intruded the meeting. I smell chicken. Chicken? The person in question was a man around his early 20s with short yellow hair and dark blue eyes. He was wearing a burgundy blazer with gold embroidery on the right, matching pants and black dress shoes. Underneath was a white dress shirt that was not fully buttoned, giving a view of his muscular chest. To Naruto, the guy looked like a douche, judging by the man's arrogant look on his face. It's been a long time since I've been to the human world. The man said, his eyes roaming around the room before his eyes landed on Rias. Delight and desire sprung from his eyes, to which Naruto rose an eyebrow at. My darling Rias, I'm so happy to see you. Rias shuddered in disgust. Riser Phanex, Rias spat his name out as if it were the plague. She obviously didn't like him. HMPH, I knew I smelled a chicken. Zarathos muttered in Naruto's mind. I just came here to inform you that the date has been set. Riser walked over to Rias' desk that shielded them apart. Now, well, I know it's a little sudden, I thought we could go visit the location the ceremony takes place. Rias growled. I've already told you, Riser, I have no intention of marrying you. Mary Issei squawked, what the hell is going on? Butchuo, what's going on? Who is this guy? All eyes turned to the pawn, and Riser looked at him as if he were a bug. Who are you? I'm Highschool Issei, Rias Gremory Sama's pawn. Wow, that actually sounded pretty formal. Naruto wondered if the boy had been practicing that line. Ah, Riser waved the boy's introduction in an uncaring manner. I see. And you didn't answer my question. Who are you? I'm surprised you didn't tell your servants about me, Riser said to Rias. Though I'm even more surprised he doesn't know me. But then, he does smell like a human. That would make him a reincarnated devil, so I guess it would make sense. I didn't say anything because there was no need to tell about you. She retorted, her tone filled with anger and disgust. Riser gave her a fixed smile. You're as harsh as usual, I see. This is Riser Phanex Ama. Graphia informed Issei and the others, Naruto included. He is a pureblood high-class devil and is the third son of the legendary Phanex family. He is also Rias Sama's fiancé. Fiancé Issei gaped, his mind not comprehending to what the maid said. When Graphia gave a nod of confirmation. Issei did what most people would have done. He fainted. Enough of this, Riser. Rias slammed her hands onto the desk as she glared at the blonde man standing before her. If looks could kill, Riser would have been dead before he even had a chance to utter his last name. I've already told you, I'm not going to marry you. You say that like you have a choice. Riser said, amused, but there was a hint of steel in his voice. We both know there isn't much you can do. Our families have already decided on this and the contract's been written up. Don't forget that your family has been just as hasty to reunite our two houses as mine. Rias narrowed her eyes, don't speak so presumptuously. She said, as the heir of the Gremory family, I am the one who will decide who gets to be my partner. She reminded him, and regardless of that, I was already promised that I would be allowed to do as I please until after I graduated from a university in the human world. I fear you don't quite understand the situation, Rias my dear, Riser said snidely. Your parents and Serzich's Sama fear your household may go extinct. In the previous war between gods, fallen angels and devils, many pure-blooded devils lost their lives in the conflict. And that's not even mentioning the number of households that went extinct. It's only natural that our parents would struggle to protect our pure blood and household by joining together. The offspring of two high-ranking, pure-blooded devils is invaluable. Even you should know that. Naruto listened on as the Phoenix talked. The ex-exorcist already familiar with what was going to happen, having seen this in arranged marriages during his time in the Vatican. Recently, newly reincarnated devils like your servants have been gaining greater influence. Pretty soon, pure-blood devils like us are going to lose all of our power until we have no standing left. Your brother, Serzich's Sama, has left the household, which means the only one who can succeed and become the Gremory clan head is you. With many of the 72 pillars collapsing on themselves, the future of all pureblood devils is hanging on this marriage proposal. Rias crossed her arms under her bust defiantly, I won't destroy my household. She glared at Riser. I plan on siring an heir when I'm ready. Her blue-green eyes sharpened as her glare intensified. But I won't marry you. I'll marry someone else. Someone of my own choosing. Even the heirs of the old households have that much of a right. Riser gave a long-suffering sigh. His fingers twitched in agitation, a sure sign that he was beginning to lose his patience. You know, Rias, like you, I am a pure-blood devil of an old household. I bear the powerful name of Phoenix. I can't let that name get tarnished. I came all the way out here to the human world just to get you, but I don't like the human world much. Flames erupted from Riser's back, taking the form of wings and showing just why his clan name was Phoenix. The fires from his back spread, the sweltering heat had the members of Rias' peerage sweating profusely, their bodies becoming drenched in salty water and their clothes caking to their skin. Strangely enough, none of them were burned from the incredible heat. Naruto knew what this was, a show of skill. Riser was showing off. And it was beginning to piss him off. The flames of this world are filthy. For a devil who holds governance over wind and fire it's unbearable. His eyes narrowed. I will take you back to the underworld with me. HMPH, this lowly Phoenix thinks that his fires are strong. How laughable. Zarathos scoffed. He looked over at her servants, Akeno, Aisa, Issei, Kiba, and Kaneko. Even if I have to incinerate your servants to do it. He then glanced to Naruto, who was silent throughout the whole exchange. Maybe even this guest of yours to prove my point. Riser smirked cruelly. Okay, he threatened Aisa, this bastard was gonna pay. Show him what real hellfire is like, Uzumaki. You lay one hand on my servants or my guest and I'll put those flames of yours out. Rias clenched her teeth. How dare this man threaten the lives of her servants? There was no way she could let such a threat go unpunished. Riser-sama, Grafia said, I suggest you calm down or you may find those flames of yours getting doused. The queen warned. Oh, well, if the one who was given the title of strongest queen is getting involved, then I guess there's no helping it. I wouldn't want to have to face Serzich's Sama's peerage. It has always been said that the Red Satan's peerage is full of indestructible monsters. Actually, I am not the one you should be worrying about, Grafia corrected. That was when Riser noticed, and so did the rest of the others. Naruto stood behind Riser, flaming chains that burned even brighter than the Phoenix's own, was wrapped around the devil's neck. I believe you should worry about him. Riser-sama. Naruto narrowed his eyes at Riser. Refrain from threatening Rias and her peerage, if you can. It'll help your health in the future. He said lowly, enough for the room to hear. Riser eyed the chains wrapped around his neck and frowned. For a second, he increased the power of his clan's fire. The ex-exorcist, in return, upped his hellfire. Zarathos influencing his thoughts as he did. Very soon, the heat within the room became overbearing as the two blondes increased their respective fires. Rias sweated and looked at the whiskered blonde with a worried glance. Was this the power of a ghost rider? Riser snarled and his flames grew larger. You dare use fire against me, he exclaimed, outraged, not to the fact that this pest used his own element against himself. No, Riser was enraged because the pest's flames actually started to hurt. Flames? Burning him. A phoenix no less. Naruto's eyes started to burn slightly. Soon, Riser bit back a pained sound when the other blonde's fire burned brighter. Thankfully, before the phoenix could retaliate, Grafia put a stop to it. Enough. She ordered, her tone with authority and ice. Riser-sama, I believe you should calm down. Naruto, please stop this. Rias added. While she knew she and the ex-exorcist weren't exactly at the best terms with each other, she felt it was necessary considering that the blondes might have burned the room down. Fine. Riser snapped and his flames dissolved, as did Naruto's. HMPH. The blonde scoffed and walked back to the other couch, getting back into his original position of sitting. Grafia looked at the Phoenix and Gremory. Sama suspected the situation to come end like this. She sighed, if neither of you can settle this with words, then we will have to resolve this issue with a means of a last resort. Last resort? Rias asked. Rias Sama, if you're going to be so insistent with your wish to not marry Rias Sama, then you will have to settle this with a rating game. Rias' confusion turned to shock. Is something the matter, Rias Sama? Grafia asked, noting the shock on the girl's face. Of course not. Rias shook away the expression and straightened up. Her image changed to one who looked like someone who made the right decision and was going with it. There's no way I'm passing up an opportunity like this, she said and glared at Riser. Riser Phoenix, I challenge you to a rating game. Of course, Riser accepted. Not that he had no reason to. It was clear to everyone that he was favored to win. Not just because he was a fully mature devil, but he also had more experience in rating games. The guy even had the gall to show his peerage to them. Even making out with his queen. Aisa cried jealous tears that moment. And so, Riser accepted the challenge with glee and even went on to give Rias and her peerage 10 days to train for the rating game. As Naruto watched from the couch, seeing Riser vanishing with his peerage in another dramatic outrow. He sighed and stood up, ignoring the maid who bowed to Rias and looked at him with a wary look before disappearing with a flash of light. He couldn't spend time with Aisa now, she probably needed the time to train. He grasped the knob and twisted it. Wait. Naruto looked at the red-haired devil in slight surprise. Rias looked down, and the blonde could see her lips opening and closing, as if she was saying something. What? The blonde asked. DKU was what he heard. Care to repeat that? You still can't hear you. Naruto smirked. I said thank you. Rias shouted, frustrated. She crossed her arms and huffed, looking away. Naruto chuckled and opened the door. He waved goodbye to Aisa, who waved back with red cheeks. With that, he exited the orc. So, this Ghost Rider, how do you know if it's really the legend Lucifer Sama told you about? A slim pale hand held a night piece as the appendage glided over another position in the chessboard. Do you really doubt me, Sona? Ria's eyes briefly glanced at the petite girl across her, watching her movements on the chessboard closely. The heiress looked down at her own pieces, missing 2 pawns and a knight. Normally no. But it is rather hard to believe that a rouge exorcist holding a corrupted seraph inside him has been living here without any of my peerage members or my familiar sensing his power. Sona pointed out. Adjusting her glasses as she moved another piece. Uzumaki is a rather slippery figure. Rias admitted, holding a bishop. Meaning? He only transforms at night and usually manages to avoid my familiar or Kaneko-chan when I order them to follow him. So that's why I felt tremendous energy during those hours, Sona muttered, remembering the vast power she had felt the past nights. She would come out to investigate or ordered Tsubaki or Saji to find the origin of the peculiar energy, but they never did locate who held the power. At least she had a name now. Have you tried to reincarnate him into your peerage? The petite girl asked, her eyes briefly looking at her childhood friend. She was surprised when Rias shook her head. I thought about it, but I rejected the idea. That's not like you. Sona mused, may I ask, why? Rias looked down at the chessboard and moved to grab a rook piece. Many complications might stop the ritual. Mainly him being a former exorcist would make him refuse my offer. Add to that spirit inside him, he would most likely be very resistant to the change. Sona concluded, seeing the logic in her friend's decision. She suddenly frowned. How old is Uzumaki-san? Rias rose an eyebrow when she heard her fellow devil's question. He's 17, why? The black-haired girl's brows furrowed. And he's not attending school or any form of education. Rias gained a thoughtful look. No, as far as I know. Sona's eyes narrowed. Now, the just won't do. Rias gave her childhood friend a look, she knew Sona for far too long, and it wasn't good whenever she had that look on her face. Sona the beauty started. The Citri didn't seem fazed by her friend's gaze. Rias, everyone deserves an education. I'm doing Uzumaki-san a favor. No matter which faction he belongs to. Rias frowned, well that may be. She was interrupted when the door to the student council room opened. Revealing one, Naruto Uzumaki. Speak of the devil. Rias mused in her head. Or was it angel? Fallen? Spirit? She didn't know. Excuse me, but do you know where class 3B is locked? The blonde stopped when he noticed the red-haired heiress. Oh, Gremory-san, didn't expect you to be here. Uzumaki. Rias gave a curt nod. Even if he did defend her from Riser, which he mainly did for her bishop. She was still wary of the ex-exorcist. What are you doing here? She asked, berating herself when it came out a touch rude. Naruto didn't seem to notice her tone. I'm here to pick up Aisa-chan. It is her dismissal, right? Or was I too early? He asked himself, delving into mutterings as he thought over his problem. Sona looked at the Uzumaki, then back at the chessboard. After a few moments, the Citri moved her bishop and took Ria's king. Beating her. The Gremory sighed when she got beaten, again, but let it slide. Uzumaki-san. Sona addressed the blonde as she stood up from the chair she was sitting on, breaking him from his inner dilemma. The black-haired girl crossed her arms and looked at the whiskered ex-exorcist. Are you attending school? She asked sharply, her eyes practically boring holes through the blonde's. No. Then it settled. Sona said. Naruto suddenly got a very bad feeling. What settled? You. Attending school. Whoa. Naruto held his hands up in alarm, his mind in a panic at the thought of going into any form of education. I never agreed to attending anything to Kuoh. It does not matter, you are attending school and getting your education. Regardless if you want to or not. Sona told him. How about a wager then? Sona looked at the blonde with a raised eyebrow. I'm listening. A challenge, any kind you want. If I win, you leave me alone. Naruto said, if you win, then I'll attend school. He grumbled. Very well then. Sona started. I challenge you. Rias watched on silently, knowing already what her friend's challenge would be. Do a game of chess. Knew it. That's it? Naruto asked. Seriously, he thought she'd have something better than that. What with being a devil and all. Sona nodded, yes. A challenge of wits. She was confident she would win. Like Rias, she too had been forced to an arranged marriage. But, unlike her childhood friend, managed to get out of it by challenging her former fiancé to a game of chess. She beat him, of course, and successfully broke the contract. Okay. Naruto shrugged, approaching the table, he took one of the chairs and sat down as Sona sat across from him, having already set up the board. Prepare to lose. The blonde declared. Sona smirked, adjusting her glasses as she did. You won't beat me. No one has beaten me. She informed the blonde, I haven't been beaten in chess since I was 10 years old. You have 0 chances in defeating me. She said confidently. Nobody would beat her at her own game. Nobody. Typical devil. Always so arrogant, Zarathos muttered. Naruto's brow twitched, maybe this wasn't a good idea after all, he gulped silently. It was on. Who's that? Look at the marks at his cheeks. Did he draw them on? Who cares? He's pretty cute. Is he a new student? He isn't wearing any uniform. Maybe he's visiting someone. Naruto sighed as he shuffled through the students leaving Kuoh Academy's grounds, walking past the girls whispering about him, admiring him at a distance. Damn you, pretty blondes. One bald guy shouted. Then, there were those guys. Stop stealing girls from us, troublesome pretty boy. Another said, this time in glasses. What the hell's their problem? Thankfully, after some walking. He finally found the class he was looking for. Class 3B. Naruto leaned against the wall next to the door as he waited for the bell to ring. As the door swung open, Naruto turned his head and watched as students filed out of the classroom one by one. Finally, familiar strands of blonde locks, a lighter shade than his, came out of the door. Aisa-chan. The ex-exorcist put a hand on her shoulder. Naruto-kun. Aisa said, smiling rather brightly as she rounded on him. The whiskered blonde smiled and jabbed his thumb towards the exit. Want to get out of here? The former nun nodded shyly. She let out a cute squeak of surprise and turned red when the ex-exorcist grabbed her hand, intertwining their fingers together as he did, while they walked past the crowd of students. Aisa looked down at their hands, noticing their fingers intertwined tightly, just as they always did back when they were young. She smiled softly and fondly reminisced the time where things were much simpler. Sadly, those times didn't last. But that didn't matter. Even if she did miss those days. She was still looked forward to what the future held for her, and with her beloved friend by her side, the future looked brighter than ever. At my side, Aisa thought, and went red as her brain caught up to the double meaning. She wouldn't mind that. Here you go, sir. Aisa said cheerfully, handing out contracts assigned to her by her king, a means for a human to summon her for favors. Thank you, lass. An elderly man smiled at her gratefully. She was already at her 20th contract today. The former nun briefly glanced at the side, seeing Naruto leaning on his chopper as she handed out summoning papers. He had been kind enough to help her, letting her drive with him around Kuoh in his motorcycle so that it could help progress things faster. It was nice, she enjoyed the wind blowing through her face, watching as trees and buildings passed by. Aisa gave the elderly one last smile, then walked back to where Naruto was. The blonde noticed her approaching and turned his head at her. Ready go? The bishop smiled. If you are, Naruto-kun. The blonde nodded and straddled his chopper, Aisa gingerly sitting down behind him. As Naruto revved the chopper, the motorcycle roaring to life. Aisa gently wrapped her arms around the ex-exorcist and rested her head on his back, not minding the texture of his leather jacket. She smiled softly. Naruto always felt warm. Aisa gasped and tightened her arms around Naruto when she felt being tilted. What's happening, Naruto-kun? The blonde grinned. Been practicing some tricks in the past, just wanted to try it. He said. Naruto proceeded to use his chopper in ways stuntmen usually did, doing flips and tricks, all the while with Aisa on his back. Said former nun giggled at his antics. So, where to? I don't know, to you, Naruto-kun. The blonde looked up, seeing the sun already setting, painting the sky with orange, yellow, and black. "How about we go somewhere to eat?" "I'd like that," Asia said after a bit of thinking. As they drove, Asia couldn't help as she looked around with childlike wonder. Watching as the street lamps, trees, and buildings were merely blurs and colors as they passed by. Shortly, Naruto stopped at the side of a street near the business area of Kuoh. The bishop looked at the side and was greeted by the sight of a small stand, the front being covered by white flaps that had kanji for Raymond. "Here we are," Naruto announced, getting off his chopper. He held a hand out to the former nun, who blushed and smiled shyly, taking his hand as he helped her off his motorcycle. The two approached the stand with Naruto leading, opening the white flaps and sat down, Asia sitting by his side. They ordered, and as the two waited, the whiskered ex-exorcist struck up a conversation. "How's the training?" "It was fine, Akeno-senpai helped me with my magic and I got a lot better with my twilight healing," Asia cheerfully informed her friend. She proceeded to tell Naruto things she did in training in preparation for the upcoming raiding game. After a small dinner, the ex-exorcist drove Asia back to the Haidu household, the residence where she currently resided with her fellow peerage member. "Why, you really didn't have to follow me to the door, Naruto-kun," Asia said shyly as they waited for someone to answer the door to the household. Naruto gave her a teasing grin. "Nah, what kind of bodyguard would I be if I didn't protect you, Asia-chan?" He teased lightly, chuckling slightly when the girl went bright red. "Moo, Naruto-kun." Before she could say anything else, the door opened, revealing Mrs. Haidu. The middle-aged woman gasped as she saw the bishop. "Asia-chan. You're finally here," she said. "I was worried, why were you out so late?" she began to ask, before noticing the other blonde. Her eyes lit up, "Oh my," a smile began to spread on Mrs. Haidu's face. "Were you out on a date, Asia-chan?" Asia spluttered, and her cheeks turned red as steam blew out her ears. Naruto coughed in his hand, his cheeks slightly pink. "Ha-san, who's there?" Issei asked, and the door opened up more, revealing the pawn in his pajamas. The sacred gear user eyes widened and he pointed at the ex-exorcist. "The hell are you doing here, idiot blonde?" he exclaimed. Mrs. Haidu gasped once again and gave her son a stern look. "Issei," she said and started to scold her son, ignoring the two blondes watching the scene with a bit of amusement. "Well, I'll be off," Naruto told Asia and started to walk back to his motorcycle. Before he could take one step, he was engulfed in a hug by the smaller blonde. Asia smiled as she embraced him, her heart beating a bit faster as she did. Mrs. Haidu giggled at the scene. "How cute," she cooed. Completely oblivious to her son, who collapsed to his knees, crying cartoonish tears. "Damn you, pretty boys," he cried to the heavens. It was silent as Naruto drove through Kuoh's streets, the humming of his chopper's engine being the only thing that was heard through the mostly empty street. The breeze picked up as the wind blew harshly, leaves and litter scattering about. "Rider," Naruto's eye twitched and he growled. He stopped his motorcycle for a moment and rubbed his gloved hands, the familiar burning sensation resonating within him. "Not again," Naruto groaned and held his head. Another gust of wind blew by, stronger than before, scattering more trash and leaves around the empty area. The blonde could have sworn he heard the very winds itself chuckle at his misery. "Someone's hiding," Zarathos muttered, before he gave out a dark growl that sounded animalistic. Naruto felt the sound leave his mouth, the fallen angel was trying to influence him again. The blonde's head twitched rapidly, his skin started tearing off again, and he felt himself burning up. He gripped the handlebars tightly and stopped his chopper completely. His eyes started to also burn, his cerulean eyes turning into flaming yellow. He hunched over and pounded his fist on his knee, trying desperately to fight back. Naruto stifled a laugh. His lips twitched and he started to grin, stretching his whisker marks as he did. The whistle was heard. The blonde snapped his head to the side, only for a black, mist-like creature to tackle him. As he was sent flying, the mist slowly shifted to that of a deathly white-skinned man. Black, unruly hair reached until his back as his black fur coat covered his body and legs. Underneath the coat was a black vest coupled with matching legs and shoes. On his back were 7 black wings. Another fallen angel. The winds twisted around him, making his image a blur. The creature grinned at Naruto, showing white, sharp teeth. Planting his foot on the blonde's chest, the man kicked Naruto, sending him towards a nearby car, breaking its front window. The winds cackled as the man flew away to a nearby building. "Show yourself, Rider," the creature hissed lowly. Naruto got off from the ruined vehicle and shook off Zarathos' effects. It was all for naught, however, as Zarathos' influence on him increased tenfold, making the Uzumaki collapse. The mist-like man saw this and grinned maliciously. He dropped off the building and sped towards the kneeling blonde, intent on taking his life, only for a charred gloved hand to grab his neck. The creature choked and desperately tried to get out of the blonde's tight grip. Naruto laughed maniacally. His skin peeled away rapidly and his outfit charred and boiled. He transformed. Soon, all that's left was a charred black skeleton, wearing Naruto's clothes. The skeleton's flaming head lifted the creature easily. Rearing his charred fist back, the rider punched the creature, sending him crashing to a tree. The creature hissed, and he grinned darkly. "Lucky shot, rider." With that, he disappeared into the dark winds, a trail of mist following him. The flaming wraith straddled his now burning hell cycle and rode off, trailing after the mist creature. Soon, the mist eventually found a dead end and went up. The flaming skeleton watched as the creature went up the building, disregarding the laws of physics. The skeleton laughed insanely. He tilted his hell cycle and revved it. The hell cycle's burning tires stuck to the building's wall and the rider drove at the side of the building, unintentionally destroying the window panes with his hellfire. At the bottom of the building, a red light appeared on the floor and in a flash, Rias Gremory and her peerage appeared. "Was this where you felt the power, Kaneko?" Rias asked her rook, her blue-green eyes never leaving the building. The white-haired Nekashu nodded mutely and pointed towards the roof of the building. "At the top," she said. Another flash of light, this time blue, appeared on the ground just a few feet away from them and they turned their heads towards the light. It soon died down and revealed Sona, along with her peerage. "You again?" Issei yelled once he caught sight of Saji Genshiro, who in return, glared back at his fellow pawn. "Miss me, pervert?" "Like hell." The red-haired heiress ignored her bickering servant and looked at the black-haired girl in surprise. "You felt it too?" Rias asked her childhood friend. Tsubaki answered for her king, "We did, Rias-sama. Which is why we came here, to investigate this commotion." Hiba turned to his king, "What's your orders, Butchuo?" "We wait." The peerage members looked at the Gremory with shock. But Butchuo Issei tried to speak, but Sona cut him off. "Rias is right. For now, we need to assess the situation and see whether this entity is friend or foe." Sona calmly explained to her fellow devils. At the rooftop, the flaming wraith's hell cycle revved up and jumped in the air, landing on the concrete roof. Hopping off his demonic chopper, the rider looked around. His flaming skull soon caught the mist as it approached him. The mist soon started to dissipate and the man was revealed again. He looked at the flaming wraith. "Kakabiel-sama doesn't want you to interfere with his plans," he said. "Soon, he will gain power. And you will only be history when he's done." The charred wraith growled lowly and approached him. His charred gloves grabbed the fallen angel by the collar. His charred and blackened skull hissed slowly as the wraith glared at the mist-like fallen. "Judgment awaits," the rider growled. The fallen chuckled darkly and escaped the flaming wraith's clutches as he started to float up. "My name is Abigail," the fallen said, "and I will be your doom." The wraith growled and grabbed the wrapped chains from his chest and unfurled it. As the blackened chains fell to the ground, the rider gripped the chains tightly. He swung it towards the fallen. Abigail raised his hands and closed his eyes, smirking when the chains passed his body. He chuckled again and looked at the flaming wraith. "You're a slow learner, aren't you, rider?" Abigail sneered. "You cannot catch the wind," the man exclaimed. The rider growled. Taking the blackened chains with another hand, the wraith tugged it harshly. The blackened chains were soon enveloped by hellfire. He brought it back, then soon swung it again. This time, he started to twirl it rapidly, creating a vortex in high speeds. Abigail looked around him in shock and growing fear. "What are you doing?" The wraith simply laughed. "No, no, no." Abigail screamed in terror as he started to get sucked in the spiraling flaming chains, watching in horror at seeing his body disintegrating before his very eyes. With a final scream of agony, Abigail died in a fiery death. The rider snapped his chains back and let it wrap around his torso once more. "The fuck was that?" Saji asked in a whisper. The group of devils having witnessing a cyclone of flaming chains completely destroy a different kind of fallen angel. Sona closed her eyes in concentration, thinking back on the earlier conversation she had with Rias during the morning. Rias shivered as she remembered the way Naruto had taken care of Rainer and Dohnaseek just a week ago, the image of his flaming chains still in her head. Approaching his hell cycle, the wraith mounted his demonic chopper and revved the engines. The hell cycle lit up and burned brighter in response to its owner as it started to head towards the edge of the rooftop. Then, he burst through the rooftop. Bee-haw. Swinging his chain, the rider swung the weapon towards the building and pulled, forcing his hell cycle to stick to the building. It was a sight to see for the group of devils, a flaming motorcycle accompanied by a flaming skeleton, destroying the laws of physics by driving down the building, shattering the windows as he did. Just as he neared the bottom of the building, the rider pulled up the handlebars. "Watch out," and landed on the ground, creating a shockwave that caused spider cracks around him and sending a huge burst of smoke, causing Rias, Sona, and the others to shield their eyes. When the devils opened their eyes, they were greeted by the sight of the rider, sitting on his hell cycle, massive spire cracks on the floor as fire appeared on other objects. The flaming wraith turned his charred skull on them. Getting off the demonic chopper, the skeleton approached them. Kaneko shivered as she felt the wraith's life form. It was bright and warm, comforting, addicting even. it made her feel safe and protected. Yet at the same time, it was also dark and burning, malicious to the point she could almost feel herself getting burnt with how corrupted it was. He had a powerful life force. Aisa looked at the wraith with slight fear, knowing just how dangerous he could be. His mind flashed back to Rainer's dead, charcoal and molten, like eyes, before she decayed. Aisa looked at the rider Naruto with nothing but kindness, no fear, no anger, and no surprise. Despite what others thought of him, in her mind he was still Naruto, no matter what. Haichu. Look out. Sona's pawn yelled, his scared gear appearing on his hand in a flash of purple light. Saji, wait, don't. It was too late, the sacred gear user shot out a line towards the wraith, only for the rider to grab the glowing line, seemingly unaffected. The flaming skeleton gripped it hard. Ah! Saji shrieked in pain. Saji. And his sacred gear vanished in the same flash of purple. The blonde pawn collapsed as his other peerage members tended to him. Sona glanced at her pawn with worry in her eyes before turning to look at the flaming wraith. The wraith was already on his hell cycle, revving the handlebars as the hellish vehicle burned with life, its flames getting brighter by the second. She watched as the wraith drove just past them and into the night. The sky was beautiful, tinted in orange, and splashed with various yellow shades as the sun started to set. It was already nearing noon, the various workers, patrons, and nuns attending to the nearby church were leaving, having done with their duties for the day. He liked this time of day. The sunset always gave him a sense of satisfaction whenever he could watch it descend on top of a small hill where a tree, tall and unmoving, rested. Naruto. Cold, cerulean eyes opened and was greeted to the sight of a small, blonde girl in a nun's habit and a small silver cross dangling on her neck. She had a smile on her face as she ran up the small hill. Asia-san. Asia Argento, a girl who he recently just met a few months back as he moved from church to church. Her smile turned to a pout as she approached him, blonde locks swaying from side to side. You know you can call me something else, right? She looked at him as she sat next to him, scooting closer. The child looked at the direction to where the other blonde was looking at and was amazed by the sight in front of her. The sunset is so beautiful. Asia awed at the display. Do you always go here, Naruto? Sometimes. The whiskered blonde admitted, his face showing no emotion. Asia pouted again. She poked Naruto's cheek. Can you try to smile? The girl suddenly asked. Smile. Asia repeated. She gave the blonde a large one, see? Like this. The child pointed at her lips. Naruto gave her a blank stare. Moo. The girl's hands moved to the edges of Naruto's lips and gently spread them, forcing the whiskered blonde to smile, which didn't work. It didn't help that his eyes looked dull and cold. Asia giggled as she played with the other blonde's face, tracing her fingers on the boy's whisker marks with a smile on her face. Her green eyes trailed down and gasped when she saw the other blonde's left hand. A medium-sized cut starting from his ring finger to the edge of his wrist. Blood dropped from the fresh wound. Naruto. Your hand. The girl cried out worriedly, quickly grasping the wounded appendage with care. My hand. Naruto repeated, his eyes glanced at his wounded hand and blinked in surprise. Oh. He said simply. Must have gotten it from training. He muttered. Holy blades were hard to hold for a 10-year-old. You need to take better care of yourself. Asia said, she looked down as her other hand enveloped the whiskered blonde's wounded one. Soon, a green glow covered her small hands, then, Naruto's cut started healing. I'm not always going to patch you up when you get hurt. She reminded him, her hands, still covered in the green glow, started to subside. Done. Naruto pulled his hand away and stared at it. It was only a scar, proof that here used to be a wound. Thank you. The whiskered blonde looked at the girl when she giggled at how his tone seemed to change when he thanked her. Naruto slowly moved his hand and went closer to the girl. A tint of red appeared on Asia's cheeks as the other blonde's hand tucked a stray blonde lock behind her ear. She smiled, a beautiful smile that reminded the exorcist in training of his mother. Do you like the sunset? The nun asked. Naruto nodded. Why? It reminds me of my Ka-san. Asia tilted her head in confusion when she heard the word. What's a Ka? Asia frowned and her nose wrinkled cutely in confusion as she tried to pronounce the word. Ka-san. Naruto corrected her. Yes, what is that? It means mother in Japanese. Oh. Asia's mouth made an O shape. You're Japanese, right? She asked. The blonde nodded. Why does the sunset remind you of your Ka-san? Asia asked, inwardly cheering slightly when she pronounced the term correctly. It's beautiful and full of life, bright and warm, comforting. Naruto listed off. Just like Ka-san, the blonde muttered. Where is your Ka-san? The little nun asked innocently. She's dead. Asia gasped and looked down in shock and sadness. I'm sorry. The girl apologized frantically. It's okay. Naruto assured her, he already got over it. Maybe in the past, he would cry, any mention of his mother would make him tear up. But the tears wouldn't come. He already shed so much tears, lost so many nights, and had one too many nightmares for someone his age. Asia looked down and mumbled something. "Thank you." The girl said. "Why? Thank you for sharing this with me. It means that you trust me," Asia said, her smile replacing her frown. "We're friends after all." She gasped and clamped her mouth with her hand. Naruto looked at her, seeing the regret that the girl had on her face, and tilted his head. "Do you want to be friends?" Asia snapped her head at what the whiskered blonde said. "Yes. I mean," she almost shouted, her eyes filled with happiness and her figure with hope. She looked down at the ground. "I've never really had any friends, so I was hoping we could be friends. I was going to ask you, but you beat me to it." The nun admitted. "Friends, do you really want to be my friend?" Naruto asked. Like her, he hadn't really mingled with his fellow trainees. Opting to mind his own business, train, and leave once he was done. "Yes." The girl said happily. "Here." Asia took something out from her clothes, fishing out a small rectangular box and handed it to the other blonde. Naruto grabbed the box and removed the cover. Inside the box was a small silver cross, much similar to Asia's, only the cross's design was more intricate and complicated, a contrast from the nun's much simpler cross. He gingerly took the necklace and placed it on his neck. The whiskered blonde looked at his new accessory, then back at Asia. "It's really nice." He said. "Thank you." Asia giggled as the two settled on the tree's trunk, watching the sunset in comfortable silence. Those were the simpler times. Pain. That was what he felt. Naruto groaned, his voice being muffled as he laid face down on the grass he collapsed on after changing back from last night. He had a massive headache right now, something he would usually have whenever he transformed back. The grass was soft. He laid there for a few more moments, just to catch up on some much-deserved rest. Zarathos wasn't saying anything, which the blonde wanted. Naruto really was not in the mood to tolerate the corrupted angel right now, his headache was still throbbing. He just needed to rest. He'd worry about other things later. Sleep was calling, and he was planning to answer the call. "How?" Naruto snorted as he watched the citrate devil look at the chessboard in shock once again, letting out a small laugh when the girl's glasses started to fall off her face. The ex-exorcist took the girl's overconfidence for advantage and managed to beat her at chess. The black-haired girl's reactions never failed to amuse him. Inside, Zarathos was chuckling, feeling a sense of victory at seeing his host beat the heiress at her own specialty. It was entertaining, to say the least. Rias looked as equally surprised as her childhood friend, expecting the match to be over in a few minutes and for Sona to ready the papers to enroll Uzumaki to Kuoh Academy. She never expected that the blonde would actually beat Sona in her own expertise, thus winning the wager he had offered to her rival. Sona herself was flabbergasted as she tried to comprehend her own loss. Her normally cold and calculating image as the president of the student council, currently absent. There she was, observing the blonde's movements and tactics, implementing her strategy to defeat him. "I don't understand." She muttered, "I was watching your every move. I observed how you played. I tried to counter your strategy." Sona whispered. "How did you beat me? I'd like to know too." Rias added. "Easy." Naruto started, standing up from his chair, he stretched for a moment, then looked at Sona. "I never had a strategy to being with." "What?" The blonde shrugged. "It's true, I just moved when it felt right to do so." He explained. Sona looked down as she picked up her glasses, staring at the wooden table for a few moments, muttering something he couldn't hear. The school bell rung. "Would you look at that?" Naruto craned his head towards the direction of the sound. Anyway, he approached the door and grabbed the knob, twisting it gently. "I have to go get Asia-chan, see ya." With a lazy wave, the blonde opened the door, leaving the two heiresses alone. The crunching of grass could be heard, but Naruto was too tired to even move. How long had he passed since he laid here? How many hours? 1. 2. He didn't know. At least he didn't feel as tired as he was before. He decided to just stay asleep. Poke. Until someone poked him with what felt to be a stick. "Wake up." The voice that sounded feminine but cold and detached from the world, similar to his own during his time as an exorcist. Another poke. "Wake up." He was poked again. Okay, this was starting to get annoying. The third time the person tried to poke him, always at the exact same spot, mind you, his head. Naruto grabbed it just as it neared his cranium and promptly chucked the branch away. "Stop bothering me." He grumbled drowsily, his mind still in a haze due to last night's events. Just as he was about to rest again, his eyes widened a bit in shock. The sheer power this newcomer had was strong, stronger than even Zarathos, and that was saying something. Their aura, it strangely felt different than any other being he had encountered. It felt like a dragon. Naruto raised his head up and was greeted by a young girl with gray eyes and long black hair. She wore a black and purple dress that looked gothic in general. "Your existence interests me." The girl started, her voice cold and distant, matching the emotions, or lack thereof, in her eyes. "Join me." Naruto blinked, once, then twice. Join my group and help me rid of a pest disturbing my home." She elaborated, "In return, I will grant you whatever you desire." The girl offered. "Yeah, no." Naruto deadpanned, looking at the girl absurdly. "I have someone to protect and I'm not gonna up and leave her to Kuoh," he said. "But your aura," the blonde trailed off, looking at the mysterious girl. "Why would a dragon need my help?" The girl gave a rose eyebrow for a split second before going back into an emotionless facade. "It seems you catch on quick," she admitted, "if you must know. My name is Ophis." It took a second for Naruto to register what she said. Despite his position on the ground, he tensed. "The Ouroboros dragon," he muttered. His mind immediately went into alarm, wary that he somehow managed to gain the attention of a dragon god. "I refuse to leave until you join me." Ophis persisted. Naruto felt a growing pit in his stomach. One wrong move and he could potentially get killed from the dragon god. "Too bad for you, I'm not going anywhere." Naruto stood up with a firm stance, he held his hand out and twin fiery short swords attached with chains appeared within his hands. He made a promise to Asia, like hell was he going to break that promise? Ophis narrowed her eyes. Naruto knew that she was hiding her true power that resided in her transformed body. To which made him all the more wary. He could already feel Zarathos burning in him. "You are a foolish but a brave idiot," Ophis said bluntly. Cue sweat drop. Naruto expected a lot of things, but he honestly didn't expect for her to say that. Then again he couldn't deny her claim either, clashing almost every day with a powerful fallen angel obsessed with eating souls and punishing the guilty could attest to that. "Sorry, but I don't really desire anything right now." Ophis stayed silent. "Regardless, you will still join me on my quest to reclaim my silence and my home," she stubbornly insisted. The ex-exorcist shifted his stance as Zarathos started to influence him more. It was slightly tempting to let the corrupted angel to take control, so he could at least escape from the dragon god. "Don't even think about using that spirit locked up inside you." Naruto clicked his tongue. "Well, there goes that. Why do you even need my help?" he asked. "Aren't you a dragon god? I think you could handle this pest all by yourself." He pointed out, while he may not know a lot of the dragon god, he did know that she was the leader of the Kuoh's brigade, a terrorist group consisting of various people with mixed races. "The battle between me and the pest would last too long. Which is why I need backup to ensure his defeat." "Sorry lady. But I still refuse." Naruto shook his head, "Not to mention I have enough on my plate as it is," he muttered to himself, Zarathos being one of the problems. There was silence. Ophis looked up before turning her head towards the ex-exorcist. "You interest me. But I have other duties to attend to," she silently muttered before turning away from the blonde. Just as she walked away, she craned her head to the side to look at the whiskered ex-exorcist. "Reconsider my offer." But that she disappeared. Naruto sighed in relief, his weapons disappearing as the dragon god's aura vanished. He needed to start watching his back. It had been a few or more days since Gremory and her peerage went into the underworld to face the Akatori. During those days, Naruto passed the time wandering around Kuoh, exploring the city while he rode on his chopper, just taking in the sights. There were more than a few stray devils to which he quickly took care of. They weren't problems at all, just a few nuisances. Currently, he strolled casually through the sidewalks that neared Kuoh Academy, wandering around the city as a pastime while he waited for Gremory and her peerage to come back. "Naruto-kun. Speak of the devil, literally." The blonde turned around, ready to greet whoever called him. Only to get tackled by a blonde missile known as Asia Argento. "Whoa." The ex-exorcist let out a small grunt and held the girl, who was currently trying to hide her face. Sobs escaped Asia. Naruto froze and looked at her. "Asia-chan, what's wrong?" he asked softly. Rubbing his hands up and down on her arms as he did, giving a bit of comfort to the crying bishop. Asia looked up, her eyes were red and tear marks streaked down her face, letting out a few hiccups as she tried to speak. "It's okay, take all the time you need," Naruto said, rubbing circles around her back as tears continued to drop down her face. The ex-exorcist gently placed a gloved hand on her face and slowly wiped Asia's tears. "We failed, Naruto-kun." She slowly started, hiccups escaping her mouth as she did. "What do you mean?" Naruto dreaded the words that came next. "We lost a riser." This was the worst day of her life. Rias closed her eyes and calmed herself as a bit of water leaked out of her blue-green eyes. She was sitting down in a room, preparing herself for her special day. It didn't feel special. It felt like a nightmare. She fixed her white wedding dress and slowly put down the veil to cover her face, masking her tears and only showing her vibrant crimson hair. The door creaked open and a young girl with blonde hair tied into pigtails that looked like drills came in. She wore an elegant orange dress, as the symbol of the Phoenix household was proudly displayed on her back. "Rias-sama, it's time," she heard her say. Rias bit her lip but nonetheless sighed and nodded. "Thank you, Ravel. I'll be there soon," she informed the girl. Ravel nodded and exited the room, leaving Rias to her thoughts. It was inevitable. How could she have been so stupid to let Riser trick her into challenging him? Even if she herself knew that her peerage was too inexperienced. For the first time in her life, Rias Gremory prayed. Not to any god, mind you, but to anyone willing to listen to her. Her prayer was left unanswered. She slowly stood up as she held the bouquet of flowers on her hand and walked out of the room. Rias took a glance at her parents. Both Zarathos and Vanillana Gremory had regretful looks as they stared at their daughter. Zarathos desperately tried to tell himself it was all for the good of the family, but at what cost? Vanillana dabbed some tears threatening to escape her eyes as she tried to support her only daughter. Standing at the altar was Riser, wearing a black suit like his sister. The phoenix symbol was also displayed on his back as he smiled happily, finally getting the woman he so lusted for. He looked over the side and felt slightly smug at the faces of his soon-to-be wife's peerage. It was unfortunate that Ria's perverted buffoon of a pawn wasn't here. It would have made it all the more sweeter as he would kiss his wife while the fool would watch. The phoenix then turned to look at his soon-to-be wife and smiled at her, frowning when she looked away from him. HMPH, he'll show her. Rias resisted the tears that begun to sting her face. It was happening. Only a miracle could save her now. Just as the ceremony begun, a large rippling sound echoed through the air, startling almost everyone in the halls, save for the high-class devils. Suddenly, a fiery vortex blazed into the wedding halls near the entrance of the reception hall. What is the meaning of this? Is someone intruding the wedding? The sound of a powerful engine ripped through the halls and echoed off the walls, silencing the devils. Out of the blazing vortex, a figure burst through, riding a flaming cycle that looked demonic. The motorcycle landed on the ground with force, cracking the floor in the process. Soon, the flames died down, revealing a whiskered blonde accompanied with a female blonde. Rias, Kiba, Kaneko, and Akeno's eyes widened when they spotted the familiar blazing chopper and rider. Uzumaki, Surzich, and Grafia also widened their eyes, but for an entirely different reason. It was him. Naruto got off his motorcycle, as did Asia, who went to sit with her fellow peerage members. Riser sneered at the other blonde. You again. He said with distaste, remembering the humiliation he had gotten when the whiskered bastard hurt him with his mastered element. Yes. Me too, Bayo. And what do you think you're doing here, trash? That's easy to guess. Naruto closed his eyes. I'm here to break off this marriage contract. Cries of outrage filled the air as Riser silently seethed at what the bastard said. He turned towards the ultimate class devils. This has to be a joke, Grafia-sama. Lucifer-sama. He cannot possibly do this. In normal circumstances, yes. Surzich conceded to that, but considering that Rias Gremory's peerage is not full, she can more than accept this young man as a temporary peace, if both sides agree, of course. Then I object. Riser shouted. Afraid to face me, Yakitori. What did you say? Riser's temper skyrocketed as flames erupted around him. I'm not afraid to face some human trash like you. Then prove it. Naruto challenged. The ex-exorcist cleared his throat. Riser Phoenix, I challenge you in Rias Gremory's hand in marriage. I'm sorry Asia. Naruto's arm slowly started to go down Asia's own, before dropping down to his sides. Asia looked up at the blonde's face as hopelessness started to set in. Her stomach churned, knowing that not even one of the strongest people she knew couldn't help her but Kuoh. The evening started to approach as the two stood in silence. The wind picked up as people retreated for the night. I see, Asia said sadly, her eyes dropping down to the ground as her shoulders slumped. Slowly, she looked up to her former bodyguard while her mouth was closed, left in a depressing frown. Her eyes said the words she couldn't say. Despite not her asking, Naruto clearly recognized the hidden emotion Asia desperately tried to mask in her eyes, a question that he dreaded her not to ask. Why? The whiskered blonde sighed deeply. I can't help you, considering the only real connection I have with the devil faction is with him. Naruto grimaced and dared not to say the name of the bastard that gave him his curse. I'm sorry Asia-chan, but there's nothing I can do. The ex-exorcist said with a frown on his face. There actually is, little Uzumaki-kun. The two froze. Another presence, powerful so, matching that of ultimate class devil, appeared in the area. The presence that Naruto all too familiar with and despised. Asia, get behind me. Naruto calmly ordered, his tone laced with barely contained hate. The former nun immediately complied and swiftly moved to get behind the whiskered blonde, her eyes darting everywhere, trying to find the owner of the mysterious voice. The voice chuckled within the darkness of the empty street. Then, the color of black flashed on the ground, rapidly transforming to a summoning circle, an unfamiliar crest appearing within the circle, at least, to Asia anyway, having only seen two crests, the Gremory and the Phoenix. Naruto glared at the flashing crest with seething fury. Zarathos was screaming in rage as a figure slowly appeared within the summoning circle, a feeling that was shared with his host. Finally the magic dispersed, and the figure's presence increased tenfold. The tapping of wood against concrete was the sound that filled the air, coupled with how thick the tension in the atmosphere was, it made for an ominous sound. Out of the darkness was a man with dual-toned hair, slicked back, along with his black duster and cane, gave him the look of a nobleman. As he approached the two blondes, a smile slowly started to form on his face. "Missed me, Uzumaki-kun?" Naruto snarled, while Zarathos flared his power that matched the mysterious figure, something which caused Aisa's knees to buckle as the whiskered blonde supported her instantly. Like hell, Naruto spat with venom. "What the fuck do you want?" he asked, his urge to just stab the smiling man in front of him, starting to overpower his will to calm down as Zarathos influenced him. Tut tut tut, the man chuckled with mirth. "Now, that isn't the way to show your appreciation to someone who's going to help you, is it? I don't want any of your help. Mephistopheles." Naruto growled darkly as his eyes started to change, while his clothes started to smoke, along with his head. Mephistopheles, Asia repeated out in shock and confusion, recognizing the famous and legendary devil, having been told of the man's stories during her time in the church. She yelped and hid behind her former bodyguard when Mephistopheles glanced at her, his blue-red eyes boring into her greens. "Oh, is this the girl you so desperately tried to find?" he asked, seemingly amused, judging by the smirk that replaced his smile. The ex-exorcist's glare only confirmed his question. Mephistopheles' smirk widened. "Kill the bastard." Zarathos screeched in utter fury, hellfire combusting around the throne he sat on as he watched the interaction within his host. Naruto briefly considered the option. Now, Uzumaki-kun." The devil started, "Why don't you calm down that little angel inside you? He is getting rather rambunctious." He chided with mirth. Naruto gritted his teeth as more of his clothing started to smoke and char. "Naruto-kun," Asia said softly, her hand gently grasping his gloved hand, even as she felt the flame that resided inside, which slowly started to die down. The whiskered blonde stopped for a moment and looked at her, his childhood friend's voice soothing the flaming rage he and Zarathos shared. He breathed in and out. His flames started to shrink as more of his smoke started to fade away. "How touching," Mephistopheles said, dabbing a fake tear from his eye. He chuckled when the two blondes looked at him, the girl with slight annoyance, coupled with a bit of fear, while Uzumaki-kun glared at him. "Oh, don't mind me, continue with this moment of yours." "But you ruined," Naruto muttered lowly before he turned back to the devil. "Why are you helping me?" Deja vu hit the blonde as hard, his mind pulling back to the first time he met the devil, who changed his life. Literally. He could still remember the blood, his blood on the paper, Mephistopheles' laughter as he disappeared while he passed out due to blood loss. "That's easy, Uzumaki-kun." Mephistopheles smiled the devil's smile. "It's simply because you've done such marvelous work for me." The devil said, circling the two blondes as he spoke, "and I always reward those who have done good." "What do you mean?" Naruto asked, thoroughly confused on what the devil said, not always remembering his escapades whenever he transformed into the rider. "The ones that you've punished, of course." Mephistopheles replied casually, inspecting his cane as he did. Asia's face expressed confusion at what the devil said. "The people I've." Naruto's eyes looked down to his charring gloved hands, slowly, his hands started to turn to fists as smoke escaped the appendages. "Killed." Behind him, Asia's eyes slowly widened. Before she could say anything, Mephistopheles laughed loudly. "Right on, Uzumaki-kun." The devil confirmed with glee. "You see, I had other humans and stray devils who made deals with me," Mephistopheles explained. "Unfortunately, they didn't exactly pay up, if you know what I mean." The devil said with a deep frown. If there was one thing he hated other than the old Satan faction, it was people who cheats him and use him to their own gain. He was supposed to do that. Not the other way around. Fortunately, however. Mephistopheles' smirk came back. "You happened to come across them during your escapades with a little angel. And so, with you killing him, punishing them, I managed to kill two birds with one stone." Mephistopheles chuckled, "You pay off your deals, while also doing away with those unpaying miscreants. And as a reward for a job well done." Mephistopheles walked towards the ex-exorcist. Naruto glared as Mephistopheles smirked. "I will help you in your little dilemma. Your little nun's master is about to be wed to one of the head phoenix's sons, am I correct?" Mephistopheles guessed. Asia looked at the devil with confusion. "How do you know that?" "Little girl, even if I don't go to the underworld anymore, there are some things that don't escape me, such as news of 2 of the 72 pillars trying to unite. Well, I can assist you with that." Naruto looked at the devil with wariness. "How?" Mephistopheles' smirk broadened. "Trust me, Uzumaki-kun. You'll see when you get there." With that, the devil turned back as he was a few feet away. Mephistopheles craned his head sideways to look at the whiskered blonde. "Now, don't you have a wedding to crash? Riser Phoenix, I challenge you for Rias Gremory's hand in marriage." Silence filled the wedding halls after the blonde's declaration. Everyone's eyes were all looking at the blonde, some were with confusion, others were with anger, the phoenix mostly, while Rias looked at the ex-exorcist with hope. "How dare you?" one voice exclaimed. The blonde's head turned towards the direction of the voice. And the sight of a fuming Ravel phoenix was what he was greeted with. "Who are you, to challenge Oni-sama? Human trash." Her voice was filled with arrogance that was similar to her brother's. Briefly, Naruto wondered if being a pompous brat was a trait among the phoenix. Soon, outraged cries were sounded off by other devils, after the female phoenix's own, as older devils glared heavily at the whiskered blonde. "Why you can't be serious, Lucifer-sama?" Riser cried out in rage. He pointed towards the blonde, he isn't even a devil. He has no political backing. This can't be allowed. "That is true, Sirzich." Zarathos interjected calmly, "This boy does not have political support, nor is he a devil himself. True that Rias could temporarily transform him into one of her pieces, but that does not leave the fact that he still has no political backing. I believe I could be of assistance." A black light appeared within the floor of the wedding hall, near the altar where Riser and Rias stood, before a figure started to appear within the summoning circle. Mephistopheles stepped out of the summoning circle and breathed the fresh air of the underworld, smiling widely as he heard the shocked and startled gasps of the old devils, along with the heads of the Gremory and Phoenix. Mephistopheles. That's my name." The devil in question replied in amusement. As for the boy's political support, Mephistopheles started. "I think I can help with that," he said, smirking when he looked at his race's befuddled and shocked faces at his statement. "What do you gain of this, Mephistopheles?" Sirzich asked grimly, looking at the ultimate class devil with wariness. "You haven't been in the underworld since the Great War. I don't see you gaining anything from letting this boy interrupt and fight Riser-sama for Rias Gremory's hand in marriage. You and I know why I'm supporting this particular boy, Lucifer-sama," Mephistopheles said with a knowing look towards the current Satan. Sirzich remained silent. "Very well then." The red Satan started, "Since Uzumaki-san." The devil's eyes trailed to look at the blonde, having known his name thanks to his little sister. If this was truly Zarathos' current host, then he would have to keep an eye on the boy. "Has a sponsor and is slated for to be transformed with a temporary piece." Sirzich looked at the seething Riser. "Riser Phoenix, do you accept Uzumaki-san's challenge? A battle that will decide the fate of your engagement." The Phoenix reined in his temper and nodded firmly. "I accept, Lucifer-sama. But once I win, I want him executed," Riser exclaimed, his glare locked on the other blonde. Sirzich fished out a piece especially created by his dear friend, Ajuka Beelzebub, and showed it towards the whiskered blonde. "Uzumaki-san, if you accept this, then you will be transformed as a temporary knight to fight for Rias Gremory." Naruto looked at Rias. "What's it gonna be, Gremory?" the blonde asked, staring at the redeed. Uzumaki Rias looked down and bit her lip, everyone staring at her to make a decision. "I, Rias Gremory, accept you as my temporary knight." The piece vanished from the Satan's hands and into the Uzumaki in a flash of red light. "May I request something?" Mephistopheles asked out of the blue. Sirzich looked at him with curious eyes. "What is your request, Mephistopheles-sama?" "That this fight will be broadcasted among the factions, for entertainment of course," the devil said, his eyes glinting for ulterior motives. Sirzich raised an eyebrow. "May I ask, why, Mephistopheles-sama?" "Oh, you know, entertainment, I'm sure the other factions would love to see two young men about to kill each other, and other reasons." The devil explained with a mysterious smile. "What are you playing, Mephistopheles?" Sirzich thought with suspicion, but did not show it. "Alright then, it has been decided. A rating game will occur between Riser Phoenix and Naruto Uzumaki. If Uzumaki-san wins, then Rias Gremory would be released from her contract. If Riser-sama wins, then Uzumaki-san will be executed. This game will be broadcasted amongst the factions, just a reminder to those who will soon be watching. Now, let the rating game begin." With that, Naruto and Riser disappeared in a flash of light. Soon, a giant projection screen appeared above everyone's heads, a way to watch the rating game. "Is this the man that beat you?" Sotan, the girl in question, turned away from the screen with flushed cheeks as she glared at her sister. Yes, he is, Oni-sama," Sona confirmed, her hand already rubbing her forehead. She could already feel a headache coming in as her sister turned towards the screen. Zarathos Leviathan stared at the screen intently, specifically looking at the blonde that beat her little Sotan at chess. "Oni-sama, please don't stare at him so intently," Sona deadpanned at her sister. Zarathos waved her little sister off dismissively, which only served to irritate Sona more. "Oh, don't worry, Sotan, it's not like I'm gonna steal your future husband or anything," the Satan trailed off with a teasing smile aimed towards her now flushed sister. "Oni-sama." Rias sat down with her peerage as she started up at the screen above, worry evident on her face. "Are you sure it was wise to trust Uzumaki-kun, Butchuo?" Akeno asked her master softly. The heiress sighed. "I don't know myself, I guess I was desperate enough to actually accept Uzumaki's help." She tried to explain her own actions, much to her own confusion. "Well, I have nothing against Uzumaki-san, do you think he'll win, but Kuoh? He is going up against a mature devil." Kiba observed, voicing his worries. "Naruto-kun's going to win." Asia answered, her eyes gleaming with determination as she looked at the screen. Rias looked at her bishop in surprise. "Are you really that confident that Uzumaki will win, Asia-chan?" The former nun nodded firmly. A few seats away, Zarathos, along with Venelana, conversed with Lord and Lady Phoenix. "What do you think of this development, Lord Gremory?" The head of the Phoenix clan asked, genuinely curious to what his fellow head was thinking. "It is a surprising change of plans, that's much to say," Zarathos said, earning a nod from the Phoenix. However, a frown slowly formed at Zarathos's lips. Venelana looked at her husband with worry. "Is something wrong?" "No, Venelana, it's just." Zarathos looked at the blonde on screen. "His aura, it seems familiar." In the middle of the wedding hall, Mephistopheles smirked. "A rating game broadcasted among the factions, you say?" Azazel repeated to what his subordinate said, his face in a neutral state. "Yes, Azazel-sama, apparently, Sirzich Lucifer has projected this rating game on the request of Mephistopheles, who had recently re-entered the underworld." The fallen angel replied as his superior muttered to himself. Azazel frowned, as digested the information, his curiosity already raised when the mention of the ultimate class devil appearing after several decades of disappearing. Why show up now? That was the main question. "Link us to the broadcast, I want to see what this battle offers." "Yes, sir." The fallen angel nodded and quickly left. "Prepare to watch, Volley." Azazel turned to the silver-haired teen staying silent at the corner of the room. Volley Lucifer raised an eyebrow, looking back at the general. "This is a devil matter," he said, "why watch this?" "That's just it, Volley. Not to mention that Mephistopheles himself requested to broadcast this. You aren't a bit curious, are you?" Volley stayed silent as a giant projection appeared in front of them. He would watch, as long as there was strong fighters, of course. Mephistopheles appearing after such a long time. Archangel Michael muttered, his eyes staring at the screen in front of him. Looking at the whiskered blonde that was on screen. "Brother, is that Gabriel?" asked softly, getting over the shock of seeing one of her faction's former agents. Not only was the man that was responsible for their brother and fellow seraph, Zarathos' demise, an exorcist that the church was currently hunting down appeared. "Yes. It appears Uzumaki-kun has joined with the devils." Michael said sadly, he had high hopes for the boy. But after learning of his betrayal, the Archangel hoped that the boy would not turn to the opposing faction. "Do we watch, brother?" Gabriel asked. Michael nodded, yes. "Well, it hurts that Uzumaki-kun has joined with the devils. I am interested to see how far he progressed during his disappearance. I, myself, am curious to what the boy had been up when we lost his whereabouts," Gabriel admitted. The beautiful seraph looked at her brother. "Then, it is decided, let us watch the battle. Let's." The flash of red light slowly died down and Naruto looked around as he was teleported across from Riser. It was a small village, at least, from what he could see. Both were in the middle of the village, a well in the middle, as they were surrounded by ruined buildings, covered in moss and dust, while a chapel was behind Riser, also ruined and partially destroyed. Naruto craned his head at the sign that was strewn in the dirt. "Sanvinganza, the hell Sanvinganza." The blonde thought silently, unaware of Zarathos glaring heatedly at the sign. The projection screen appeared in the skies and the two blondes looked up to see Sirzich's face. "Remember, if either of you are knocked out or call forfeit, the match is over." The two nodded. "Then, let us begin. You may have caught me in surprise the first time we met, human." Riser started, "But your pathetic flames won't even touch me, a superior being. We gonna fight or are you gonna drone on about your massive ego?" The Phoenix scoffed. "Once I'm done with you, I'll enjoy making Rias along with the females in her peerage mine." He licked his lips as Naruto's eyes hardened. "They're going to be great additions to my harem." "Now you made it personal." Naruto muttered lowly. The whiskered blonde summoned twin blades that connected to chains and gripped the handle of each blade tightly. His jacket and head starting to smoke lightly. Within an instant, the ex-exorcist appeared in front of Riser, his speed having been augmented thanks to the night peace in him. He grabbed the back of the Phoenix's head forcefully and sent the devil smashing right into the dirt, dust settling as he did. Riser tried to get back up, but to no avail. Naruto quickly stabbed one of his blades in the devil's neck and with a great pull, sent the devil flying into the air. The Phoenix crashed into one of the houses of the small village, bringing down wood and rubble on him as he did. "Beat his ass." Issei yelled, having been too late to the wedding, which he also planned to crash, but was massively disappointed when the eyed blonde already did it first. But seeing Riser getting his ass kicked was a good exchange. "He's almost as fast as you, Kiba-kun." Akeno observed as she watched the ongoing battle. "But he is." Kiba said silently. "Since when did Uzumaki-kun had those in his disposal?" Michael asked no one in particular as he observed the weapons the former exorcist summoned. "Is it his mother's chains?" Gabriel suggested, having seen Kushina Uzumaki wielding the same chains as her son did before she passed away. Might be. Michael semi-agreed to his sister. Let us watch the battle, for now. Back in the battle, a blast of fire occurred, sending the rubble everywhere, causing Naruto to shield his face, as dirt and dust kicked up. Lucky shot. Trash. Riser stood up with a snarl, his natural healing ability as a phoenix, already mending the wound that the other blonde gave. You're not the only one who has weapons. In a fiery flare, the phoenix held a burning spear within his hands, as sneered at the equally glaring whiskered blonde across from him. The two charged at each other. Flaming wings appeared on Riser's back and he started to go off the dirt ground. Dodge this, trash. Naruto used the area as his advantage, stepping onto the well's edge, the blonde flipped up as Riser sailed through the air, spear in hand as his flaming wings missed its target. The ex-exorcist threw his blade chain at the unsuspecting phoenix's back, watching as Riser screamed in pain when the blade embedded between his shoulder blades. Naruto let himself fall directly above Riser and used him as a landing pad. Riser screamed in outrage. A medium-sized burst of fire knocked Naruto away. The blonde grunted when he felt a hand on his neck. Naruto wearily opened his eyes and was greeted by the sight of Riser Phoenix snarling at him. In the Citri household, Zarathos gasped in shock at the turn of events. Don't lose now, Narutan. Your wife still needs you. Zarathos cried out, much to the amusement of Lord and Lady Citri, who were also watching the battle. And to the embarrassment of her little sister. One-sama. The phoenix's snarl turned into a sneer. His expression turned to confusion when the ex-exorcist merely smirked at him, his eyes glinting. What are you smiling at, trash? Naruto's smirk only widened. To your left. Riser looked at the blonde with more confusion. To my wa. Riser never noticed the blazing motorcycle that was coming at him in speeds. Having ignored the engine's roars due to the adrenaline inside him. He also never noticed it until it ran him over, keeping him in place as it stabbed his torso with its front spikes that was at the sides of its headlights. Riser screamed as the flaming chopper drove around the middle of the village. Need a hand, Yakitori. The phoenix's head shot up in shock as he saw the ex-exorcist actually riding the damned motorcycle, with that equally damned smirk on his blasted face. Here, you need it. Naruto reared a flaming fist back and sent a left hook towards the devil's face, knocking Riser from the chopper and sending him towards the dirt ground. What kind of bike is that? Azazel hummed in curiosity as he looked at the demonic-looking motorcycle that the whiskered blonde rode on. You have that face again. Volley said silently, his own eyes looking at the ex-exorcist in interest, watching as the phoenix created more spears of fire and throwing it at the Uzumaki, while the whiskered blonde either dodged or destroyed the flaming spears with his own flaming chain blade. That face that says you're on to something. Volley elaborated. Azazel stayed silent. No. Riser's sudden shout of rage, coupled with a fire that flared out of the devil, caught Naruto by surprise. I refuse to lose from trash like you. Riser flew towards the ex-exorcist in speeds and threw a flaming fist towards the whiskered blonde, only for a gloved hand to catch the fist with ease. That better insults. Naruto shouted back and sent an uppercut which made Riser fly up into the air. The whiskered blonde smirked and aimed his chain blade carefully. He had so been waiting to use this line after discovering a game back in America. With a cry, the blonde threw the chain blade. Get over here. The blade stabbed Riser in the middle of his chest and with a strong pull was sent towards Naruto's way. Riser seemed to have enough and grabbed the blade, pulling it out of his chest forcefully, watching as his healing ability quickly took care of his wound. The phoenix snarled and tackled the blonde, sending the two of them in the air this time. This ends. Now. In his rage, Riser flipped the two of them, their heads facing the ground as they flew down fast. The phoenix grabbed Naruto by the collars of his jacket and threw the whiskered blonde towards the direction of the ground with force. I will show you the power of the Phoenix clan. Riser held his hands up and soon a humongous fire that was bigger than the Phoenix himself appeared above his head. Burn, you fucking human trash. With a rage-induced scream, Riser sent the giant fireball down on the ground, watching as the fire engulfed and entirely covered the trash that dared challenge him. A sinister smirk spread across the devil's face, seeing part of the area they fought and engulfed in a color of orange and yellow. He could feel the heat even from here, but unlike the human trash's flames, it did not hurt him. It gave him the feeling of satisfaction. He looked up at the skies. Well, what now, Lucifer-sama? This pathetic trash could not stand. The flaming chain wrapped around his neck. Riser's eyes widened and his breathing hitched. Come here. Riser had no choice as he was forcefully brought down by back to the ground. He crashed harshly, the familiar feeling of rage boiling inside him burned higher and higher. Yet, strangely, there was an ever-growing feeling that was planted at the back of his mind. Fear. The Phoenix screamed in fury and pounded a fist at the ground and stood up. Why you dare? Riser was interrupted when he was forcefully pulled from the ground, the feeling of the trash's heat radiating off his opponent in waves. He was met face to face with a charring skull surrounded by flames. The trash's clothing used by who or what it was this time, its clothing charred and burnt, even boiling. The charred skull hissed as its black holes bore into Riser's eyes. An image that the Phoenix would never forget. Shock was the reaction that came from the angels watching. Michael nearly fell off his throne as the projection went on, while her sister let out an audible gasp that softly echoed around the small section of heaven they resided in. The male archangel quickly recomposed himself and sat straight on his throne as Gabriel did her best to find her words. "Be brother, that's a," Gabriel tried to say. I know," Sister Michael himself tried to steal his voice as he stared at the burning skeleton that was Naruto Uzumaki. His eyes settling into guilt knowing that the boy was once a fellow servant of his father that was loyal to the end. The Archangel's mistake was, the boy was only loyal to those he cared deeply about, which was the nun he was forced to exile due to her healing a devil. But how? Uzumaki-kun never made contact with neither Zadkiel or any other spirit of vengeance. Gabriel panicked, her mind going haywire as she tried to find any memory of when the young man had ever came or heard about the tightly kept secret that was the spirits of vengeance. Spirits of vengeance, agents of the biblical God himself. Beings who come down from heaven and into the human realm to punish the guilty. Even after Noah's Ark, the very event that nearly eradicated humans from Earth, only to be saved by Noah, who listened to the Lord's words. They did not listen and continued to sin, kill, steal, wage wars. Despite the second chance they were given by the biblical God. The biblical God was not at all pleased at the outcome. And so, he sent down beings known as spirits of vengeance, led by one of his creations, Zadkiel. To bring down his wrath towards the humans due to their stubbornness, hate, and greed, and malice that seemed to never end no matter how much he tried. Be it as it may, Michael swallowed. We need to see who Uzumaki-kun is bonded with so we can end this problem. The flaming skeleton laughed insanely as Riser threw fireball and flaming spear after spear at him. It didn't work. The charred skeleton growled lowly and instantly fiery chains descended upon Riser once again, burning brighter than before. The hellish chains wasted no time and impaled the Phoenix all over his body, on his leg, chest, and arms. The burning wraith's arm snapped to the left and the chains harshly threw itself, Riser with them, to the walls of the ruins, destroying wall after wall, as Riser had to endure being swatted from building to building. The chains suddenly stopped, landing Riser smack dab in the middle of the village, just in front of the well. Thunder sounds of his opponent's hellish motorcycle was heard, and before the Phoenix could do anything, he witnessed the flaming chopper drive in circles around him, trapping him in the middle of the village. Lack of air due to the flames started to choke Riser. Fortunately, the burning vehicle stopped and the Phoenix felt relief when he heard it speed away from him. He inhaled and started to catch lost oxygen. Only for a charred boot to meet his chin as the chains released him. Riser screamed as he was punted from the middle of the ruined village. He shortly crashed at the old chapel that resided at the front of the village. The Phoenix tried to get up once again. The rider zipped across the small village and in front of Riser with ease and wrapped his chains around his neck. It was time to finish this. The flaming skeleton tugged hard, seeing the Phoenix tumble across the concrete ground of the ruined chapel and towards him. Riser grunted and fell charred gloved holding the sides of his head, feeling the texture of the ash that clung to the ex-exorcist's gloves. The Phoenix stared in fear as the blackened flaming skull stared at his face. "I will show you, true hellfire." The charred skeleton opened his mouth, small fiery orbs appeared within the blackness of his eye sockets. Boom. A nova-sized explosion engulfed the entirety of the village, bigger than the fireball Riser threw, leveling the ruined collapsed houses, sending the various wood and stone and a few leaves to burn, literally incinerating some. Azazel looked at the screen in wonder, staring at the orange flaming explosion that engulfed the broadcasting screen. "Do you see this, Vali? This is the power of a spirit of vengeance." Vali stayed silent. However, his eyes were different, looking at the screen as the flames died down. "Naruto Uzumaki," Vali muttered. A glint appeared within the scared gear user's eye. The gargantuan hellfire explosion ended, and what was left of the arena was a leveled San Venganza village. Debris scattered the area as ash rose to the top of the raiding game arena. Stones, wood, and dirt were strewn about as a lone flaming skeleton stood tall. The charred skull looked around the destroyed village. The blackened hand struggled to get up before a gloved hand grabbed the healing appendage and forcefully brought a burnt Riser Phoenix up. He was charred, his healing ability desperately trying to fix him as best as it could, seeing as flesh tried to cover bone and exposed muscle. Riser was finished, more than that he was defeated, utterly humiliated, and beaten. He was done for. There was only one thing he could do. "I forfeit." Naruto woke up with a sharp gasp, his chest jerking upwards as he steadied his frenzied breathing to a more sedate pace. The ground he laid on was cold and sturdy, much like the emptied streets of San Venganza where he'd previously had been. His eyes widened and he rose up once he realized he was no longer in the arena. "So you're finally awake." A gravelly voice, familiar and dark, called to the side HMPH. Took you long enough. The blonde jerked his head towards the direction and was greeted by the sight of the spirit residing in his body. Zara the blonde attempted to speak, only for him to end up in a coughing fit, much to the spirit's amusement. When he finally gained control of himself, the whiskered teen spoke once more. "Where the hell am I?" he demanded, unconsciously smelling his breath which gave off a lingering scent of smoke. "Your mindscape." The fallen angel answered, his skeletal hand gesturing towards the darkness that surrounded them. The only sound emanating from it was the crackling of fire within Zarathos. The blonde surveyed the area around him, his brows furrowed. "This is my mindscape?" he asked, before attempting to see past the dark abyss that surrounded the two of them. His eyes strained. "Why is it so dark?" "You tell me, boy." Zarathos scoffed. "Do you honestly think that bonding with me would not leave any side effects to your psyche?" the spirit asked. The teen looked hesitant for a moment. "I thought of it, but I never dwelled on it," he admitted. "Throughout the time you were running away from my brother and sister's little soldiers and nuns, the constant paranoia and fear you carried with you degraded your mental health as time passed on." Zarathos explained. "Add that with your sleep-deprived state, it would be obvious that your mental state will not be as healthy as it used to be." The fallen angel chuckled. "Of course that part is my doing." Naruto stayed silent for a moment. "So you're saying I may be insane?" "Not exactly, no. You're far from that. But you do have a few screws loose." The blonde sighed and held his head. He felt a migraine coming. "The last thing I remembered was fighting Rias," he recalled, then looked at the spirit that sat on a throne. "Did you take control?" Zarathos nodded. "That pest of a phoenix was annoying me," he growled out. "The moment you got knocked out I seized control and showed him whose flame was superior." The fallen angel chuckled darkly. "He won't be terrorizing the Gremory's little group of devils for a while." Naruto closed his eyes and sighed. "I see." He stayed silent. "If you beat Rias, then that means," his eyes widened. For the first time he's met with his container, Zarathos barked out a laugh at his partner's expression. "Congratulations on taking his place as that Gremory's fiancé," Zarathos said with amusement in his tone. "That is if those arrogant creatures would allow you and her to actually be wed." "I doubt it," Naruto scoffed. "I don't care about that, as long as Asia's safe. Then I'll gladly fight those old bats anytime," he declared. "We'll see about that," Zarathos said, his tone still holding lingering amusement before he looked up. "One of the Satans are coming," the fallen angel informed his host. "It's time for you to wake up." But those words, Naruto nodded and closed his eyes. He awoke to fire and smoke. The telltale signs of him still being in Zarathos' form stood out. His bony hands, coupled with his now torn clothing and the lacking of flesh, gave him the idea that the spirit allowed him to at least give him control. The first thing he saw was the various debris that scattered across the ruined village. Black, thick, smoke rose from the burning buildings that were lucky enough to be standing. The ruined cathedral that stood on the grounds looked even more destroyed at whatever the spirit inside him had done. The cross that used to hang from the cathedral's wall was sticking out of the dirt, charred and burnt. The remnants of the other parts long gone, burned to ashes along with the rest of the other buildings. The groan that was mixed with a whimper hit Naruto's skull, and he looked down. He held Rias by the arm, the teen, now blackened from the blast, the once proud and smug expression he held, now completely wiped off from his face, replaced with a fearful expression mixed with anger and hate. The blonde tightened his grip on the arm. Rias hissed from the pain, his healing factor went to the max, replacing exposed muscle and bone with pink flesh that stood out from the blackened rest. The skeleton proceeded to grip the weak arm of the devil harder, the charred skull craning his head to stare at the phoenix as the fire surrounding his entirety gave off a menacing vibe, a silent question to which Rias knew the answer to. "I forfeit." Wisps of black smoke enveloped the phoenix's enemy's exposed skeletal features, shortly blowing away to reveal the whiskered visage and blue eyes of the spirit of vengeance's host. Now the victor, the blonde teen changed his gaze from his opponent to the sky as the Lucifer's voice rung from above. "Rias Phoenix has retired. The winner is Naruto Uzumaki." With that, the two started to glow as different crests appeared below them, signifying the end of the match as destroyed village started to crumble and crack before them. Until they completely disappeared, leaving the dimension behind as it continued to destroy itself. Shock was the first thing Rias felt when her brother's words rang in her head. Shock that the gamble and the risk she had taken had actually worked. Shortly joy replaced shock once the realization of her brother's words processed in her mind. She was free. Finally free. No more restless nights, worrying over the time limit the Phoenix gave her. No more stress over training her peerage to the maximum. At least, until she, or they, drop. Slowly, tears started to slip from her eyes, but the girl quickly wiped them off before anyone would notice it. She still had an image to maintain, after all. At her side, her peerage also cheered at the announcement, whereas Aisa also cried tears, knowing that his Bachu would still be wed off to someone he didn't like. Asia smiled as she cheered with the others, happy that her childhood friend had managed to pull through in the end. Throughout the fight, she continuously worried for Naruto despite the confident facade she had put up. But she didn't have to worry anymore, he had won, and that was all that mattered. From the corner of the room, Mephistopheles held a small smirk on his face, hidden by his top hat, as he observed the finished match with amusement and mirth dancing in his eyes. With a small chuckle, his family crest appeared below where he stood and disappeared within moments' notice, never catching the attention of the other devils, all who were too busy in watching the match. At the Citri mansion, Sona smiled in delight at seeing the blonde's victory. A tiny yet still noticeable pink dusting tinted her pale cheeks as she silently cheered for the boy who had beaten her and unknowingly caught her interests. Fufufu from her side, her older sister giggled, her finger on her lips as she watched, giggling all the while. It sounded devious. A bit far too devious for the Citri heiress's liking. Now I can see why you're interested with this boy, so Zarathos observed the blonde within the projection with interest that unnerved Sona. When Isama the younger devil started. Don't worry too much Sotan. I won't take him away from you. Zarathos assured her little sister, giggling at the girl's flustered state. But maybe a coy expression replaced her jovial previous facade, a contrast from her childlike words a few seconds ago. When Isama. Sona shouted, her cheeks set ablaze. I kid. Zarathos laughed as the younger devil fumed. Silence befitted the one area of heaven that Michael and Gabriel occupied. A thick and tense atmosphere replaced the once curious air moments ago, the two angels still calming down from shock at what happened to their former ally. To think, Uzumaki-kun had been acting as a host for a spirit of vengeance during his exile, Gabriel muttered softly, as Michael nodded grimly. Does Sariel-kun know about this? The beautiful Seraph questioned her brother, to which Michael responded with a negative reply. Based on his reports and findings on Uzumaki-kun, I doubt he even knows he's in Kuoh as we speak. The leader of the angel faction grimaced. But that is not the main problem. He sighed and moved up from his chair. We need to find who he bonded with before it's too late. Michael said. And more importantly, we have to keep this a secret between ourselves. Gabriel didn't understand. But wouldn't informing Sariel-kun of Uzumaki-kun be more beneficial in the long run, brother? No. At best, Sariel would most likely keep this to himself and inform only those he trusts. Michael started. But at worst, if Zadkiel would hear of this, Gabriel gave off a pained expression. Chaos would ensue. She concluded. Her brother gave her a nod as he came up with a decision. We must discuss this with Azrael and Surzich at once. Naruto wearily opened his eyes, his hand now feeling weightless as the scent of ash and smoke that used to clog his nose was replaced by candlelight, an aroma that he hugely preferred to the former. Literally, he fully opened his eyes and was met with the sight of the shocked and for some, angered, faces of the devils that sat on the round tables of the wedding hall. His chopper, now transformed back to its original state, was still parked right in the middle of the red velvet carpet, which was now stained with tire tracks. I'm back. Indeed you are, Naruto Uzumaki. Surzich's voice rang out before he, along with his wife appeared via teleportation. The Mayu smiled as he walked up to the blonde. Congratulations on winning the match. He said. Even throughout the beginning the Lucifer knew that the whiskered teen would win the match. The moment that Naruto transformed was the moment Surzich knew Riser would lose. It may have been one-sided from the start, but it was entertaining to say the least. While there might be issues that may pop up in the nearby future, you being an ex-exorcist and all. The House of Gremory and the House of Phanex has accepted the results of the match. Surzich informed him. Since when was it ever simple? Naruto muttered as he looked around him. Where's Riser? Resting within the Phanex estate as we speak so he could properly recover. Surzich answered. It will be quite some time for Riser to properly function. Zarathos really doesn't hold back. Naruto thought. His attention shifted back to the Mayu as he cleared his throat. Well, there are certain questions that I would like to ask you about the particular spirit inside you. Surzich spoke up, his face now set to a serious expression as Naruto tensed. But that quickly went down as the devil smiled at him assuredly. That can wait for another time, preferably without prying eyes. He said, before he clamped a hand on the blonde's shoulder and gestured towards the hall. For now, enjoy your victory. You'll have more attention than this for days to come. Nodding his head, Naruto bowed to the two in respect. Thank you, Lucifer-sama, Graphia-san. Surzich merely grinned. You call me Ani-san if you want to. A sudden slap to the head, courtesy of his wife hit him at the back, causing him to cry out in pain. Graphia-tan, what was that for? Before the Lucifer could finish his sentence, his wife immediately grabbed him by the ear, pulling him down as she scolded him. The woman turned to Naruto with a sigh. I'm deeply sorry for Lucifer-sama's attitude, Uzumaki-san. She apologized. It's fine. Naruto waved it off as he stared at the pouting Mayu with a golden eyebrow quirked up. How could he act so serious, yet childish at the same time? With a sigh, the blonde teen walked away from the bickering couple and headed towards his chopper. As he did, the sounds of footsteps hit his ears behind him. Naruto-kun. He turned around. Asia. With a leap, Asia wrapped her arms around the startled teen's neck with a shout of joy, enveloping him in a tight embrace. The force, small as it may be, managed to make Naruto take a step or two back as his arms found their way to the small nun's back. The two laughed as they spun in their embrace, not a care in the world, simply happy to be with each other once more. Shortly, Naruto set her down. Asia shyly avoided his gaze by lowering her head as she nestled herself in his chest, hiding the red dusting that covered her cheeks while she snuggled tightly against him, her hand still gripping his. "You did it." Ria's voice broke the silence, causing Naruto to look up as the retreat approached. "You actually did it." "I did." Naruto replied with a small smirk on his face, looking down on the girl as he held Asia. Rias gave him a small smile. "Then a congratulations is in order," she said. Without any warning, Rias stood on her tiptoes and planted a kiss on the whiskered teen's cheek, earning a gasp from Asia as Naruto widened his eyes. The devil stepped down. "Thank you." Her face held a true genuine smile that was directed to him. With that, she turned her back and walked towards her peerage before she craned her head to the side. Maybe you're not as bad as I thought, Uzumaki." And with that she walked away. Naruto stared at her retreating form with wide eyes. Asia was not faring well. Moo. Envy blossomed in the little blonde's heart, displayed on her face which held an angry pout at her Buchu who had kissed Naruto. As she mumbled unintelligible things under her breath, the girl looked up and cutely glared at her childhood friend. Then reached up and pinched his cheeks. "Ow. Hey Asia, what the heck? You're staring." "No, I'm not. Promise." Moo. It was gonna be a long day. At the punk. The gloved fist slammed against a man's cheek, causing him to stumble backwards, the man's back hitting against a wooden table with a grunt before a boot was driven to his gut, driving the man towards the table and knocking it down along with him. Another one grabbed him from behind, locking his arms in an attempt to stop him only for to stumble back with a shout of pain, holding his now bleeding nose. The man looked up from his down position, staring at the glazed and drunken red eyes of a young man that was nearly covered by his black spiky mane. The jacket he wore was now ruffled up and torn in some places, added with a few drops of blood, gave off a menacing sight. The young man snarled, his whiskered cheeks quirking upwards as he grabbed the bastard with a broken nose by the collar and lifted him up and readied his gloved fist. Wait. But the scarred teen didn't and slammed his fist right towards the man's broken nose, shattering it further and knocking the poor bastard out. The hand attempted to grab him, but he quickly latched onto it and tightened his grip, crushing the bones of his assailant. Using his other arm, the black-haired teen grabbed and threw the man towards the other side with inhuman strength. Watching as he crashed against one unlucky fellow and sliding off the wall. A thick wooden stick smashed into his head and broke, causing him to go down. "Ha. How's it feel? Fucker." The growl escaped the teen's lips. Still on the floor, he grabbed the man's ankles and forcefully dragged him down. Sitting atop of him, the whiskered teen proceeded to treat the one smug bastard like a punching bag, continuously bringing his gloved fists, which were now stained red, down on the man's face. Satisfied with what he had done, the black-haired boy stood up from the barely breathing man before he was knocked down once again, this time from a larger and beefier man. "Is that all you got, you shitty brat?" The fat bastard laughed as he pinned the teen with his weight. To the man's shock, the whiskered brawler grabbed him by the neck and proceeded to lift him up before throwing him against a table, the furniture crashing down beneath the weight. "Over here, tough guy." Another voice shouted. Craning his head just in time, the teen watched as the knife passed his head. Then he grabbed the wrist of the bastard with the knife, a growl escaping his lips. His hand gripped it until the satisfying crack of bone splintering hit his ears as the man screamed. He watched as the man fell down with a whimper. Trying to crawl away from him, completely abandoning the blade he used to have. Walking up to the man, the teen lifted his boot and brought it down, hearing a loud and sickening crunch from the head. Sounds of hurrying footsteps from the right hit his ear, and the black-haired boy raised his arm just in time to catch the boot that was gonna drive to his face. "Ah." Grabbing the offending leg with both arms, he slowly raised it until it was up in the air, causing the man to be dangling a few inches above the ground. The man protested and begged, but it all fell on deaf ears. With a roar, the whiskered teen brought down the leg he grabbed forcefully. And the bastard screamed in agonizing pain as his bones forcefully entered the part of his body where it was not supposed to be. The black-haired young man watched as the poor sod held the rigid leg in pain before he turned around. Red eyes scanned the now broken chairs and tables that littered the bar, the jukebox in the corner, now embedded with a steel pole sticking right out of it, while the many decorations on the wall, laid on the floor, broken. He rolled his shoulders a bit, feeling a satisfying pop as he turned to the counter and reached for his back pocket. Pulling out a simple $100 bill and left it for the bartender that was too busy cowering underneath the counter. He turned to leave, but not before grabbing a half-empty bottle of beer and kicking a downed man, then fully exited the bar, swaying from side to side as he took a swig outside the trashed bar. He left the bar as he downed the more of the beer, taking another chug only to feel nothing. Grunting, he tossed the empty bottle to the side and headed over to a motorbike that had seen better days. Only to find a man standing next to his vehicle. Grunting, the teen growled at him. "And who are you?" He slurred his words, alcohol reeking of his breath. "You want some of this?" The man simply chuckled. The teen gritted his teeth and charged at him. He swung at the man, but the moment it looked like he was about to get hit, the bastard leaned out of the way. Every time, every kick and punch the teen sent his way. "Fight me?" The whiskered boy roared in anger, his drunken state severely affecting him as he swung his fist once more, only to end up slipping and tumbling towards the ground, panting and groaning. All the while never noticing the blue energy the mysterious man had slowly transferred into him. The teen looked up at the sky, his vision darkening as his consciousness slowly started to fade. The TSK was heard from the man. "Tut tut tut young man," he chuckled, looking down at the panting teen with amusement in his eyes. The man stared at him, the boy desperately tried to get up, struggling and thrashing, his body too tired to move. "You never learn, do you, boy?" With those words the whiskered teen closed his eyes.